Chapter 2632. As Sakyamuni's doubts, a trace of doubt appeared in Sakyamuni's eyes. He immediately looked around and frowned slightly. Then he saw Sun Chi's incredulous expression. "Senior Marshal Brother's son, what's wrong with me? And where is this place?" Sakyamuni looked at Su Chi in confusion. Sun Chi was already stunned and speechless. He was sure that Sakyamuni's soul had been destroyed and his vitality had been cut off. There should be no hope for him. However, Sakyamuni had come back to life, and the head that Juon had cut off had actually grown back on its own. This was really beyond Sun Chi's understanding. "Junior Marshal Brother Shirtion, don't you remember anything at all?" Sun Chi asked tentatively. Sakyamuni recalled carefully and muttered to himself in a low voice, "I remember that I was injured by that bastard Juon, and Senior Marshal Brother's son, you helped me, and then, I think I was beheaded by that bastard." At this point, Sakyamuni hurriedly touched his head and found that his head was intact. A strange look appeared in his eyes. "You've guessed correctly. Your head was indeed chopped off by Zhuowen. However, you've grown a new head. It's as if you've been reborn. Even the life force in your body has been reborn," Sun Chi said solemnly. He guessed that Sakyamuni probably had a strange ability to regenerate his head even when his soul had been destroyed and annihilated. Under normal circumstances, regenerating a severed head was not a strange thing. Virtual Sky World cultivators could also do it. What Sun Chi found strange was that Sakyamuni was clearly hopeless and couldn't be saved, but he suddenly came back to life. This was really strange. Moreover, Sun Chi carefully observed Sakyamuni and found that the latter didn't seem to be experiencing terminal lucidity before death. Instead, he seemed to have really come back to life. After Sakura came back to his senses, he revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. He didn't expect that he actually had such a powerful ability. Although he couldn't make sense of this so-called ability, since he could regenerate his severed head, and because of that, he knew that there must be a power in his body that he didn't know about. Although he was very interested in the phenomenon of resurrection, he also knew that with his current cultivation, he was afraid that he would not be able to figure it out. He could only wait until he became stronger in the future. Perhaps this hidden ability in his body would slowly surface to the surface. "Junior Brother Shirtion, what is the background of that Zhuowen? How can he be so powerful?" Thinking of Zhuowen's abnormal strength, Sun Chi still had some lingering fear. Although he wasn't invincible among the masters of the heavenly law, he was at least far stronger than ordinary masters of the heavenly law. Unexpectedly, he was still defeated by Zhuon. What was even more terrifying was that Zhuon had just comprehended the death realm. If this abnormal guy was allowed to continue to grow, he would probably be very powerful. Sakyamuni's heart was gloomy. He was also extremely afraid of Zhuon. He didn't expect that Zhuon would progress so quickly. He had already become so powerful that he and Sun Chi couldn't do anything to him. There should be a huge secret on this brat's body. "Senior Brother Sun, can you inform the White Rainbow Hall to send some experts over and completely annihilate this Zhuowen? The secret on this brat's body is definitely not small. It will definitely be of great benefit to your White Rainbow Hall." Sakura said. Sun Chi shook his head and said, "That's not easy. Xianmi Heavenly Domain has a limit on the number of people who can enter the 8 heavens. Our Baihong Hall is considered one of the top ordinary forces, so we have a quota to enter the 8 heavens. It's impossible to send other cultivators over." "Why is that?" Sakyamuni asked curiously. Sun Chi smiled bitterly and said, "Do you think that the 8 heavens are extremely vast? If you really think so, then you are gravely mistaken. The 8 heavens are simply dwarfed by the Xianmi Heavenly Domain and the Antediluvian Heavenly Domain. Whether it's the Xianmi Heavenly Domain or the Antediluvian Heavenly Domain, their territories are much larger than the 8 heavens. The number of cultivators they have is also extremely terrifying. If everyone can enter the 8 heavens, then the 8 heavens will really become crowded and even chaotic. Moreover, the restriction on entering the 8 heavens was issued by the Tao Palace level forces. Even the Tao Palace level forces dare not disobey." Sakyamuni nodded and said, "I see. Then it seems that the other forces can only send one person over, right?" Sun Chi shook his head and said, The stronger the force, the more quota they have. After all, this is not a charity event. Naturally, the stronger the force, the greater the advantage. Moreover, the number of geniuses they can bring back from the 8 heavens is also limited. Sakyamuni nodded and revealed a thoughtful expression. Sun Chi spoke again. Junior brother Shi, leave the 8 heavens with me first. I will take you to the Xianmi heavenly domain. With your talent, you will definitely soar in the White Rainbow Hall and surpass Jun. Senior brother Sun, don't you plan to go to the Sakyamuni domain and the other heavens to screen for geniuses? Sakyamuni asked curiously. Sun Chi sighed softly and said, I used a powerful escape talisman to escape from Zhuan. Moreover, I only have one on me. If Zhuan catches up to us, our lives will be in danger. The best choice now is to leave this place as soon as possible. Otherwise, if we encounter Zhuan again, I'm afraid we will really be unlucky. Sakyamuni fell silent and clenched his fists. He looked in the direction of the Seuss Divine Temple with a murderous look in his eyes. He'd never imagined that such a day would come where he was forced into such a state by a fellow he'd taken to be an ant in the past. Moreover, he didn't dare provoke Zhuan and could only flee with his tail between his legs. This battle was absolutely the greatest stain on Sakyamuni's life, and he would definitely get revenge for it. However, he wouldn't do it now, and he'd do it after his strength improved once more. Sakyamuni was clearly aware that he possessed the Earth-rank ancestral Tao root and special abilities within his body. Once he'd completely taken root in the Xianmi heavenly domain, then Zhuan would probably not be a match for him if he came to the Xianmi heavenly domain. Moreover, the gap between him and Zhuan would grow even wider at that time. Sakyamuni had never been an impulsive person, and it was obvious from this that he'd restrained himself from making a move against Zhuan after the bet with the Sky Tao ancestor. Senior brother's son, let's go. I ought to have many things to learn when I return to the Xianmi heavenly domain this time, right? Sakyamuni smiled lightly. Sun Chi heaved a sigh of relief. He was most afraid that Sakyamuni would act impulsively and look for Zhuan to get even with him right now. If that really happened, then Sun Chi would definitely have to consider if he should forcefully take Sakyamuni away. Fortunately, Sakyamuni was very rational. He knew that the current situation was pressing, and he couldn't act rashly. Zhuan descended onto the ruins of the Seuss Divine Temple, yet he didn't release his divine sense. He looked at the green-furred corpse and said, Green Hat, you've always said that you've lived for countless years and even watched the development of this expanse of the starry sky. I presume you're aware of this even without searching, right? Chapter 2633. 3 boxes. Zhuan shrugged and said, That's a small matter. Green Hat, tell me in detail what you are looking for in the Hue Temple. The green-haired corpse couldn't be bothered with Zhuan, who didn't change his words. Instead, it went to the center of the ruins and reached down with its right hand. With a grab, it pulled out a jade pillar. Since the end of the mythological era, the land of origin has been completely abandoned and hidden. Without this thing, you won't be able to find the land of origin. The green-haired mummy grabbed the jade pillar and said to the empty space below, There are some good things down there. Go and look for them. They might be beneficial to your cultivation. Zhuan looked at the jade pillar in the green-haired mummy's hand and felt that it was unusual. The surface of the jade pillar was engraved with dense and strange patterns. With a single glance, one could tell that these runes were extraordinary. Zhuan could even sense an ancient and vicissitude aura from these runes. It was as though they came from ancient times and were extraordinary. However, he was quickly attracted by the empty space below the jade pillar. He sensed an extremely rich starry sky energy in the empty space. He also sensed a strong Taoist rhyme in the starry sky energy. Zhuan summoned the Thunderfire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword. The 2 divine swords turned into a hurricane and blasted towards the empty space. Suddenly, the small empty space was blasted open. Zhuan jumped into the space. After a few minutes, he reached the bottom. The bottom was not as dark as Zhuan had imagined. Instead, it emitted a light like starlight. About 10 meters in front of Zhuan, there was a jade table with 3 boxes on it. After Zhuan stored all 3 boxes into his spirit ring, he checked the space around him. After confirming that there was nothing else, he left the cave. What did you find? Bloodscale asked. There are 3 boxes, but I haven't checked what's in them yet. Let's get on the space-time roulette and catch up with my wife first. Zhuan summoned the space-time roulette and jumped onto it. The green-haired mummy shrugged and felt that this brat was worrying too much. He was actually so concerned about his wife. Bloodscale naturally had no objections. After handing over the control of the space-time roulette to Xiaohei, Yuan sat cross-legged on the deck and took out the 3 wooden boxes from his spirit ring. Upon closer inspection, Yuan discovered that the surface of the 3 boxes was also engraved with complicated patterns. They had the same ancient aura as the patterns on the surface of the jade pillar. Yuan opened the first box, and suddenly, a gust of wind roared out. Yuan couldn't help but take a few steps back. He was surprised to find that this gust of wind contained extremely terrifying starry sky energy fluctuations. This was also the reason why many previous heavenly domain lords were able to successfully reach the Tao-confirming realm and enter the Xianmi heavenly domain. If they didn't have the heavenly domain origin energy, it would be impossible for them to successfully reach the Tao-confirming realm. Of course, once they succeeded in reaching the Tao-confirming realm, the heavenly domain origin energy of the 8 heavenly domains would not be enough for them to cultivate. Therefore, they basically chose to leave the 8 heavenly domains and enter the Xianmi heavenly domain. Opening the second box, Zhuan let out a sigh of relief. This box did not contain the previous spiritual consciousness, but an irregular crystal filled with Tao charm. This crystal was only the size of a thumb. There were dozens of them in this box, and each of them was filled with a strong Tao charm. These are heavenly Tao origin crystals. Each of them is of high quality. I didn't expect there to be so many of them. Bloodscale suddenly came in front of Zhuan and stared at the crystal in the box. Zhuan reacted. This was the first time he had seen this kind of crystal. However, this was not the first time he had heard of heavenly Tao origin crystals. He knew that this was something used for Tao-confirming realm cultivators to cultivate. It had the same effect as spirit stones for void sky cultivators. Tao-confirming realm cultivators could plunder the heavenly Tao origin crystals for the heavenly Tao origin crystals they needed to cultivate. Moreover, from Bloodscale's eyes, Yuan could see that the heavenly Tao origin crystals in this box were of extremely high quality. At least, even Bloodscale showed such a surprised expression. Zhuan put away the box, and Bloodscale stared at Zhuan's right hand with exaggerated eyes. His eyes were full of reluctance. Chapter 2634. Extravagant. Heavens, it's actually a special grade heavenly law origin crystal. This is a very rare item, and there are actually 40 of them in this box? Bloodscale cried out involuntarily. Is this kind of thing really that rare? Zhuan really couldn't stand Bloodscale's shouting. Bloodscale's breathing was heavy, and it took him a while to calm down. Of course, heavenly law origin crystals are precious to begin with, and high-grade and special-grade ones are even rarer. I've cultivated for countless years, but I've never obtained a special-grade heavenly law origin crystal. The best I've obtained is a high-grade heavenly law origin crystal, and I've only obtained one, and it was after countless hardships. Thinking up to here, Bloodscale couldn't help but look at the 2 boxes in Zhuan's hands. He felt as if his worldview was about to collapse. Such rare special-grade heavenly law origin crystals had actually been obtained by Zhuan, and he had obtained 40 of them in one go. Whether it was in the Desolate Heaven domain or the Xianmi Heaven domain, these 2 boxes were definitely priceless treasures. Zhuan had no concept of the value of heavenly law origin crystals. On the contrary, he felt that Bloodscale's performance was a little excessive. Shrugging his shoulders, he took out a high-grade heavenly law origin crystal and casually tossed it to Bloodscale. What realm can this heavenly law origin crystal help you recover to? Bloodscale was taken aback, but soon revealed a look of ecstasy. He said, "This high-grade heavenly law origin crystal can help me recover to the heavenly law master realm. If Master can give me a few more high-grade heavenly law origin crystals, I still have hope of recovering to the Dao Yuan master realm. At that time, I will be even more helpful to Master." Speaking up to here, Bloodscale revealed a flattering smile. Zhuan had never seen this before. After all, Bloodscale was the king of the Devouring clan, and he had his own pride and dignity. In the past, this fellow had never spoken a single word to him. Now, he was showing such a flattering smile because of a high-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystal. This made Zhuan realize that the high-grade and special-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals in his hands were definitely extraordinary items. They would definitely be very useful after he reached Tao affirmation. Zhuan sternly refused blood scale. Since he knew how precious it was, he naturally couldn't give blood scale too much. It would be of great use to him in the future. Blood scale's face was filled with disappointment. However, obtaining a high-class Heavenly Tao origin crystal was already quite good. Next, Zhuan took out the God Stone from the first box and began to cultivate. He planned to test the effects of the God Stone before he caught up with Mu Chenxue and the others. Crash! When Zhuan tried to absorb the divine energy from the God Stone, he was surprised to find that the God Stone was surging with a powerful starry sky energy that even he could feel unexpectedly and entered his body. This starry sky energy was definitely of the highest quality he had ever absorbed. It filled his entire body and made him feel warm. In less than 2 hours, nearly half of the energy in the God Stone had been absorbed by Zhuan. The energy in the God Stone was so pure that Zhuan didn't even need to refine it. It was all converted into his own divine energy. He had also successfully reached the peak of the death comprehension realm. As long as he could completely merge the profound life divine energy and profound death divine energy, he would become a genuine life and death dual extremities expert. At this moment, the space-time roulette controlled by Xiao He had caught up with Mu Chenxue and the others. Because of Mu Chenxue's senses, they were able to find Mu Chenxue and the others so quickly. Mu Chenxue and the others were hiding in a meteorite belt. The one who came out was Yao Xiangjuan. After discovering that it was Zhuan, Yao Xiangjuan happily welcomed Zhuan and the others in. Big brother Zhua, it's great that you're fine. Where are the naughty Shiva and Sun Qi? After bringing Zhuan to the cave where Mu Chenxue and the others were hiding, Yao Xiangjuan couldn't wait to ask Zhuan. Magatama, Yuezu, and Palace Master Jingyun also looked at Zhuan. In their opinion, Zhuan didn't have the strength to fight against Sakyamuni and Sun Qi at the same time. For him to be able to catch up to them so quickly, it should be because he had escaped from Sakyamuni and Sun Qi's pursuit. Only Mu Chenxue silently looked at Zhuan. She wholeheartedly trusted Zhuan, believing that Zhuan's strength wouldn't be worse than Sun Qi's. I've already cut off Sakyamuni's head and Sun Qi has already fled. After saying this, Zhuan threw out Sakyamuni's head. He looked at Mu Chenxue and said, Chenxue, I've already eliminated Sakyamuni for you. Mu Chenxue gave a slight nod as her heart was filled with sweetness. To have a husband who wholeheartedly cared for her, Mu Chenxue felt very happy. What? He actually killed Sakyamuni? So strong. Palace Master Jingyun, Magatama, and Yuezu were all shocked. Soon after, they looked at Zhuan with eyes filled with awe. As for Yao Xiangjuan, her face was filled with bitterness. She knew that she didn't understand Zhuan at all. Zhuan's strength had already reached this level. After Zhuan informed everyone that there was no longer any danger, he brought everyone back to the Wenshui Palace. Zhuan's return naturally caused quite a commotion in the surroundings of the Wensnow Palace. Many cultivators clamored as they were filled with reverence, wanting to see Zhuan's true appearance. It was a pity that Zhuan went into seclusion as soon as he came back. He ordered Magatama and Yuezu to collect the materials for the life or death pill. After knowing that Zhuan was going to concoct the life and death elixir, the Moon Ancestor and Emotion were even more shocked. The life and death elixir was a grade 9 divine elixir, and it required a grade 9 alchemist to concoct it. Zhuan said that he wanted to refine the life or death pill. Could it be that Zhuan was also a level 9 alchemist? Thinking of this, Yuezu and Magatama felt even more reverence for Zhuan. They knew that their lord of the heavenly domain was much more powerful and terrifying than they had imagined. Naturally, they paid more attention to Zhuan's orders. They didn't dare to neglect them in the slightest. During the time that Zhuan was in seclusion, Mu Chenxue took care of many trivial matters in the Wenshui Palace for Zhuan. For this, Zhuan was extremely touched. He gave half of the heavenly law origin crystal he had just obtained to Mu Chenxue. Zhuan knew that Mu Chenxue was already a half-step heavenly law lord. If she cultivated step by step, her chances of reaching the Tao affirmation realm would be very slim. However, with the heavenly law origin crystal, it would be much simpler. It should be known that a high-grade heavenly law origin crystal contained much more heavenly law origin crystals than the heavenly domain origin crystals of the 8 heavenly domains. If a half-step heavenly law lord used a high-grade or special-grade heavenly law origin crystal to cultivate, they would be able to break through. Of course, if Zhuowen's method was seen by the cultivators of the Xianmi heavenly domain, he would definitely be regarded as a wastrel. Generally speaking, first-step Tao affirmation cultivators basically used low-grade heavenly law origin crystals to cultivate. Only some wealthy cultivators could afford to use mid-grade heavenly law origin crystals. Using high-grade heavenly law origin crystals to cultivate was already an extremely extravagant thing. This was because most of these crystals were used by second-step Tao affirmation cultivators. Chapter 2635. Pangu's sacred body in the blink of an eye. 3 months had passed. During these 3 months, Yuan had been in a state of seclusion. In the gloomy room, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. The terrifying flames that covered his body were slowly extinguished. In front of him was a huge alchemy furnace. At this moment, the flames at the bottom of the furnace had also extinguished. From the top of the furnace, a refreshing medicinal fragrance wafted out. Zhuowen's eyes suddenly sharpened. Then he slapped the alchemy furnace with his right hand. A crisp sound came from the alchemy furnace. The lid of the alchemy furnace opened, and dozens of elixirs flew out. These elixirs were black and white, and they were filled with the strange aura of life and death. They were the level 9 life and death elixirs. Zhuan took out a jade bottle and placed all the life and death elixirs that had just come out of the furnace into it. His face revealed a satisfied expression. During these 3 months, Magatama and Yuezu had been searching for the ingredients for the life and death elixir. When all the ingredients were gathered, Yuan began to refine the life and death elixir. Until now, Yuan had refined more than 300 life and death elixirs. This was a terrifying number. It should be known that in the 8 great heavenly domains, a life and death elixir was priceless. Many cultivators would fight over it. However, Yuan alone had refined more than 300 life and death elixirs. This meant that these 300 life and death elixirs could create more than 300 super experts at the life and death realm. Of course, Yuan was still a little dissatisfied. In fact, he could refine more life and death elixirs, but the ingredients for the life and death elixirs were limited. After all, the divine herbs that could refine level 9 life and death elixirs were extremely precious and rare. If it weren't for Zhuowen being the ruler of the Great Brahma domain and having an extremely strong appeal, he wouldn't have been able to gather all the herbs needed to refine more than 300 life or death pills in just 3 months. Zhuowen was a little hesitant. He didn't know if these 300 life and death pellets could help him smoothly break through the life and death realm. Suddenly, a terrifying aura rushed over from the corner of the room. Immediately, a figure slowly stood up from that corner. This figure was none other than Zhuowen's clone. At this moment, the star of fire between the black-clothed Zhuowen's eyebrows was extremely blazing. It flickered with a dazzling red light, as if there was a scorching flame burning and churning in the depths of the star of fire. Originally, the flame star on Zhuowen's forehead was extremely dim. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see the mark of the flame star. But now, the star of fire between the black-clothed Zhuowen's eyebrows was burning fiercely, as if there was a ball of fire burning in the depths of the star. The fiery star was the symbol formed after Zhuowen's doppelganger merged with the Zhurong worm. It also meant that he was qualified to cultivate the Pangu's sacred body. Now, the fiery star seemed to be real and was burning fiercely. Obviously, Yuan had officially started cultivating the Pangu's sacred body. At the same time, the moment he officially started cultivating the Pangu's sacred body, an ancient and vicissitude divine thought was transmitted to his divine soul. This divine thought was cold and ruthless. It sounded like the sound of metal being knocked on. It was emotionless. From this divine thought, Zhuowen knew the true cultivation level of the Pangu's sacred body. Of course, Zhuowen's Pangu sacred body was still incomplete. This was because the true Pangu sacred body required the collection of the 12 ancestor sorcerers' venomous insects and merging them into one's body to achieve the Pangu sacred body. Yun had only merged with the Zhurong worm. It was a bit difficult to say that he had the Pangu sacred body. However, the code he cultivated was indeed inherited from the Pangu sacred body. In the future, it was only a matter of time before he collected the other ancestor sorcerers' venomous insects. After all, he had the Pangu banner and the Pangu sacred body. Other people might be able to get the ancestor sorcerer's venomous insects to cultivate the ancestor sorcerer's body, but they could never merge with other ancestor sorcerer's venomous insects. Otherwise, they would definitely explode and die. However, Thuan was qualified to merge with many ancestor sorcerers' venomous insects. This was Zhuowen's advantage. In the divine thought, the Pangu sacred body was the same level as the sorcerer tribe. The sorcerer tribe was divided into 9 stars. They were 1-star heaven wizard to 9-star heaven wizard. Above heaven wizard was the ancestor sorcerer's body, which was 1-star heaven wizard to 9-star heaven wizard. Naturally, there were only 12 spots for ancestor sorcerer. Only those who were lucky enough to get the ancestor sorcerer's venomous insects could cultivate to become ancestor sorcerer. Ancestor sorcerer's strength was far beyond that of heaven wizard and human tribe cultivators of the same level. Zhuan cultivated the Pangu sacred body. Although he only had the ancestor sorcerer's body now, his strength was stronger than the ancestor sorcerers of the same level. After all, the Pangu sacred body was far more powerful than any code of the sorcerer tribe. It deserved to be called the strongest code. During these 3 months, Zhuan tried to let the black-clothed Zhuowen absorb the high-class heavenly law origin crystal. Zhuan was pleasantly surprised that the black-clothed Zhuowen's strength was increasing when he absorbed the high-class heavenly law origin crystal. It seemed that the sorcerer tribe also used the heavenly law origin crystal for cultivation. After consuming 10 high-class heavenly law origin crystals, the black-clothed Zhuowen barely reached the beginner level and reached the 1-star Pangu sacred body. Zhuowen did not have many heavenly law origin crystals with him. Moreover, he had given half of them to Mu Chenxue. He only had 20 high-class and special-class heavenly law origin crystals with him. This time, in order to let the black-clothed Zhuowen reach the beginner level of the Pangu sacred body, he had spent half of the high-class heavenly law origin crystals. Even Zhuowen felt the pain in his heart. Of course, the results were indeed a pleasant surprise for Zhuowen. After attaining the 1-star Pangu sacred body, the black-clothed Zhuowen's strength increased a lot. Zhuowen estimated that if he were to face Sun Qi again, his clone would be able to kill Sun Qi with 1 punch. It could be said that neither the 1-star heaven sorcerer nor the heavenly law master was a match for Zhuowen. The black-clothed Zhuowen might not necessarily be at a disadvantage when facing an expert at the level of Master Daoyuan. This was the terror of the Pangu sacred body. If he encountered an expert like Primordial Chaos Master, who was at the 3rd minor realm of the 1st step of Dao validation, the black-clothed Zhuowen might not be a match for him. However, Zhuowen was confident that he could at least escape from such an expert. Zhuowen looked at the remaining 10 high-class heavenly law origin crystals in the box. He knew that even if the black-clothed Zhuowen absorbed all 10 high-class heavenly law origin crystals, it would be impossible for him to advance further and reach the 2-star Pangu sacred body. The 1-star Pangu sacred body alone had consumed 10 high-class heavenly law origin crystals. The resources required for the 2-star Pangu sacred body were definitely several times or even dozens of times more than the 1-star Pangu sacred body. Perhaps only the special class heavenly law origin crystals can continue to improve the Pangu sacred body. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He only had 20 special class heavenly law origin crystals in total. Moreover, from Bloodscale's attitude, he could see that the special class heavenly law origin crystals were extremely precious. Chapter 2636. Advancing to the extremities of life and death after careful consideration, Zhuowen decided to use the special grade heavenly law origin crystal to increase the strength of his doppelganger. These were troubled times. Putting aside the fact that the cultivators of the Xianmi heavenly domain were about to arrive, Zhuowen did not know how long the seal at the gap in the origin heaven domain could last. Whether it was the Xianmi heavenly domain or the origin heaven domain, Zhuan maintained an extremely high level of vigilance. In the eyes of these two heavenly domains, the 8 heavens were more like sacrificial lambs for the competition between the 2 heavens. If Zhuan was not strong enough, it was very likely that he would not be able to protect himself when he encountered unknown dangers in the future. This was not what Zhuan wanted. The special grade heavenly law origin crystal was indeed precious, but if he did not have enough strength, it would be a waste to leave it lying around. It was better to convert it into his own strength as soon as possible. After thinking this through, Zhuan no longer hesitated. He took out the box containing the special grade heavenly law origin crystal and handed it to the black-robed Zhuan. The black-robed Zhuan took the box and swiftly opened it. He took out a special grade heavenly law origin crystal and began to absorb the energy inside. Instantly, Zhuan only felt a terrifying energy rush straight into his internal organs. The energy in the special grade heavenly law origin crystal was so rich that it exceeded Zhuan's imagination. The energy around the black-robed Zhuan swept out like a storm. Zhuan's pupils shrank, and he hurriedly set up a concealment array and several defensive arrays around the black-robed Zhuan, preventing this terrifying energy fluctuation from spreading to the outside world. As expected of a special grade heavenly law origin crystal. Such rich energy. It's much richer than a high-grade heavenly law origin crystal. Zhuan's main body stood not far away. He clicked his tongue in wonder as he watched the energy fluctuation around his doppelganger. It's time for me to attack the extremities of life and death. I hope these life and death pills are enough for me. Zhuan calmed down and took out bottles of life and death pills and placed them around the praying mat. He sat down on the praying mat and opened the first jade bottle. He poured out a life and death pill and swallowed it. At the same time, Zhuan summoned the illusory heavenly bridge. At this moment, a black lotus and a white lotus were growing on the 9th step of Zhuan's ethereal bridge. The black lotus was filled with the aura of death while the white lotus was full of vitality. These 2 lotuses contain the profound life divine energy and the profound death divine energy respectively. What Zhuan needed to do now was to fuse the 2 lotuses together and create the life and death divine power. The moment he swallowed the life or death elixir, a concept of the fusion of life and death appeared in Zhuan's mind. As Zhuan comprehended this concept, he tried to merge the profound life divine energy and profound death divine energy in his body. Of course, the 2 divine forces in Zhuan's body were simply too powerful, much more so than an ordinary cultivator with 9 steps. When Zhuan tried to merge them for the first time, he immediately failed. Zhuan was not discouraged. He already knew that the process of advancing to the 2 extremes of life and death would not be so smooth. Therefore, he was very calm about his first failure. After swallowing the second life or death elixir, Zhuan continued to try to merge them. A month later, after swallowing more than 200 life or death elixirs, Zhuan's ethereal bridge finally changed. On the 9th step of the ethereal bridge, the 2 lotuses, one black and one white, actually merged together and formed a strange giant lotus with alternating black and white colors. This lotus was filled with the aura of the fusion of life and death. Zhuan took a step forward and stepped onto the 9th step of the ethereal bridge. Immediately after, he sat down on the core lotus seat of the black and white lotus. In an instant, the aura of life and death enveloped Zhuan's entire body as if it was baptizing Zhuan's entire body and soul. As he bathed in the aura of life and death, Zhuan could clearly sense that his entire body was undergoing an inconceivable change. The profound death divine energy and profound life divine energy in his body had completely merged and formed a new divine force. This divine force was naturally the divine energy of life and death. Moreover, this divine energy of life and death was even more powerful and surging than the profound death divine energy and profound life divine energy. It made Zhuan feel as if his entire body was filled with strength. The ethereal bridge slowly dissipated while Zhuan landed on the ground. His face was suffused with vigor. After advancing to the 2 extremes of life and death, he could clearly sense that his strength had undergone a qualitative leap. In the past, when his main body comprehended the state of death and did not rely on his clones, His strength was at most equivalent to the peak of the two extremes of life and death. If he encountered an existence like a half-step heavenly Tao master, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Now that Zhuan had advanced to the two extremes of life and death, he was invincible in the same realm. He could even kill a half-step heavenly Tao master with a single slap. Of course, if he encountered a real heavenly Tao master, Zhuan guessed that he might still be slightly inferior. However, Zhuan knew that he had just advanced to the two extremes of life and death. Once his cultivation reached the peak of the two extremes of life and death, or even the half-step heavenly Tao master, he would not be afraid of ordinary heavenly Tao masters at all. He might even be able to defeat them. After advancing to the two extremes of life and death, Zhuan was in a good mood. His gaze fell on the black-clothed Zhuan in the corner. Immediately, he was stunned to discover that the box that originally contained 20 special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals was now only left with 5. Fuck, my clone used 15 special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals. Zhuan was shocked and looked at the black-clothed Zhuan in disbelief. Especially when he discovered that the black-clothed Zhuan only had a 1-star Pangu's sacred body, Zhuan's heart almost collapsed. That was 15 special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals. Yet his clone had not advanced to a 2-star Pangu's sacred body. The energy required to advance to a 2-star Pangu's sacred body was too terrifying. However, Zhuan was slightly comforted by the fact that although his clone had not advanced to a 2-star Pangu's sacred body, the flaming star between his eyebrows was even more blazing than before. Moreover, the clone's aura was much stronger than before. Obviously, he should have reached the peak of the 1-star Pangu's sacred body realm and was not far from the 2-star Pangu's sacred body realm. After the special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals in the clone's hand were used up and turned into countless white fragments, he grabbed another special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystal under his painful gaze. Looking at the box that only had 4 special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals left, Zhuan's heart ached even more. After the clone used up the 16th special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystal, Zhuan's sharp eyes noticed that a second flaming star had split out next to the flaming star between the clone's eyebrows. However, this flaming star was extremely dim and there was only half of it. Compared to the first flaming star, it was not only incomplete but also dim. Zhuan's eyes lit up. He knew very well what this half of a star represented. This meant that the clone was about to step into the 2-star Pangu's sacred body realm. Every time the Pangu's sacred body advanced to a star, an additional star would appear between the eyebrows, which represented the level of the Pangu's sacred body. Chapter 2637. 2-star sacred body. Thinking of this, Zhuan no longer felt heartache over the consumed special class Heavenly Law Origin crystals. Instead, he poured out the remaining 4 special class Heavenly Law Origin crystals from the box and threw them to his doppelganger, intending to let his doppelganger absorb the 4 special class Heavenly Law Origin crystals in one go. In an instant, the energy fluctuations around his doppelganger became even more terrifying. In addition to the Heavenly Law Origin crystals that his doppelganger had brought, there were now 5 special class Heavenly Law Origin crystals surrounding his doppelganger. The energy fluctuations they emitted were much more terrifying than before. Even the large array that Zhuan had set up around him was a little shaky and showed signs of trembling violently, as if it was about to completely collapse. Zhuan's expression changed slightly. He immediately took out the beast bone array disc and began to stabilize the large array around him. Finally, he suppressed the terrifying trembling. As he continued to absorb the energy of the 5 Heavenly Law Origin crystals, Zhuan clearly noticed that the second flame star between his doppelganger's eyebrows was beginning to complete. When the 5 special class Heavenly Law Origin crystals were completely turned into powder, the surrounding chaos finally stopped. Zhuan's original body discovered that the half-flame star between his doppelganger's eyebrows had completely recovered. Although the second flame star was still very dim, it was at least much better than the previous half-flame star. At least it looked very complete. His doppelganger suddenly opened his eyes, revealing a look of excitement. He did not expect that he had really advanced to the 2-star realm. Although he had just barely entered the 2-star realm, his strength had undergone earth-shaking changes. With the divine power of the Pangu's sacred body, Even a primordial Tao cultivator would not be a match for his current doppelganger. Primordial chaos cultivator might not be able to kill his current doppelganger. It could be said that his current doppelganger had the ability to protect himself even in the Xianmi heavenly domain. Zhuan planned to let his doppelganger consolidate his realm for a while, so he did not plan to come out of seclusion now. Although his original body had advanced to the two extremities of life and death, he still had the supreme-grade divine stone he had obtained. Back in the space-time roulette, Zhuan had only absorbed half of the energy from the supreme-grade God Stone to cultivate to the peak of Enlightenment Death Realm. Now, he had 1.5 top-grade God Stones on him. He believed that if he absorbed the energy of 1.5 top-grade God Stones, it would be enough for his original body to cultivate to the peak of the life and death extremes. After all, the quality of this divine stone was much higher than any top-grade divine stone in the 8 heavens. The energy it contained was also not something an ordinary top-grade divine stone could compare to. Zhuan was very confident in this divine stone. Zhuan spent half a day absorbing all the divine stones in his hand. His aura instantly soared to the peak of the twin extremes of life and death, and he wasn't far from becoming a half-step heavenly Tao Lord. Looking at the last box in his hand, Zhuan smiled bitterly. He had obtained 3 boxes, and the divine stones and special-grade heavenly law origin crystals had all been used up. There were only 10 high-grade heavenly law origin crystals left in this box. Zhuan's original body could rely on these high-grade heavenly law origin crystals to comprehend the heavenly Tao and step into the half-step heavenly Tao Lord. He even had a chance to become a heavenly Tao Lord. However, Zhuan didn't do that. He knew very well that haste made waste. By using these high-grade heavenly law origin crystals, Zhuan could indeed become a half-step heavenly Tao Lord in a short period of time. However, the process of Tao affirmation emphasized one's own understanding of the heavenly Tao and not relying on resources. This would inevitably have side effects on one's future cultivation path. Now that Zhuan's clone had reached the 2-star Pangu's sacred body, his strength was already guaranteed. Naturally, he wouldn't choose to cultivate in such a short-sighted way. After all, if one cultivated step by step, their foundation would be more stable, and they would be able to go further in the future. This was like building a house. The deeper and more stable the foundation, the higher the house could be built. If the foundation was not stable, the house could easily collapse even if it was built very high. After putting away his clone, Zhuan left the place where he was cultivating in seclusion. At the door, he immediately saw Magatama and Yuezu, who were guarding outside. "You guys have been guarding outside all this time?" Zhuan looked at the two of them and asked with a frown. Magatama and Yuezu quickly responded submissively. They felt that Zhuan's aura seemed to have become stronger. In front of the current Zhuan, they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They knew that Zhuan's strength must have increased a lot during this seclusion. Thinking of this, their reverence for Zhuan became even stronger. Zhuan nodded. He was quite satisfied with Magatama and Yuezu. He also found that their cultivation had reached the life enlightenment realm. They should have advanced when he was not in the Wen Snow Palace. Zhuan took out 10 jade bottles and handed them to the two, saying, "Each of these 10 jade bottles contains more than 10 life or death pills. There are more than 100 pills in total. Take them first and store them in the Wen Snow Palace. Use them as rewards in the future. Of course, the two of you have the priority to use them. You don't need my permission. You can use them for your cultivation." As soon as these words came out, Magatama and Yuezu trembled and revealed surprised and ecstatic expressions. They were surprised that Zhuan had refined so many life or death pills and ecstatic that they had the priority to use them. It had to be known that the life or death pill contained the energy of life and death. Whether it was the life enlightenment realm, death enlightenment realm, or life and death realm cultivators, they all had benefits that were hard to hide. It could increase their cultivation speed. For Magatama and Yuezu, having a single life or death pill was already a great favor. But now Zhuan had given them over 100 life or death pills and had given them priority to use them. How great of a favor was this? "Domain Lord, many thanks for your favor." Magatama and Yuezu knelt on the ground, sincerely bowing to Zhuan. Zhuan waved his hand and said, "Where's Chen Shui?" Young Miss Chen Shui is still in seclusion and hasn't come out yet. Yuezu carefully said, Domain Lord, do you want me to call young Miss Chen Shui? No need, Chen Shui should be at a critical moment in her breakthrough, so there's no need to disturb her. Huan waved his hand. He knew that Mu Chen Shui had obtained the Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal, and with her Phoenix bloodline, her cultivation speed would definitely be faster than his. Perhaps her cultivation could even reach the Tao Origin realm. It was clearly unreasonable to disturb Mu Chen Shui at this moment. Yuezu nodded. After hesitating a bit, he said to Zhuan, Domain Lord, while you were in seclusion, many unknown cultivators appeared in the Great Brahma domain. Moreover, these cultivators were all very strong, at least in the life and death realm. There were even cultivators suspected to be Tao-confirming realm experts. Chapter 2638. The members of Xianmi Heavenly Region, are there many of them? Have there been any conflicts? Zhuowen's gaze was gloomy. These cultivators from the powers of Xianmi Heavenly Region were definitely existences at least at the level of Heaven Tao Masters. If it wasn't necessary, Yuan wasn't willing to enter into conflict with these cultivators. Even though these cultivators from Xianmi Heavenly Region seem arrogant, they didn't look for trouble with us. However, during this period of time, these people have occupied the assignment hall and erected a stone stele within the hall. Supposedly, that stone stele tests the so-called ancestral Tao root, and the ancestral Tao root is supposedly related to whether one can attain the Tao in the future. It's the symbol of a cultivator's natural talent. Magatama hurriedly cupped his hands and spoke. Zhuowen frowned slightly. Looks like Sun Qi is right. Most of these cultivators from Xianmi Heavenly Region have come to recruit people, and they don't care about the gap that seals the primitive Heavenly Region. Actually, Yuan didn't know that the cultivation civilization in Xianmi Heavenly Region had already developed to the extreme, and the law of the jungle was displayed vividly there. Formidable powers controlled most of the resources, and it was even to the extent that the geniuses with top natural talent were reserved by those formidable powers in advance. On the other hand, the geniuses with inferior natural talent were selected by those slightly stronger powers, and they were divided up layer by layer. So, there was practically no new blood with good natural talent left behind for those powers at the lowest level. It could be said that most of the cultivators that had come to the 8 heavens were sent over by the powers at the lowest level of Xianmi Heavenly Region, and their strengths weren't especially strong. However, they were extremely enthusiastic towards the cultivators of the 8 heavens. After all, the 8 heavens were like undeveloped lands. Perhaps there weren't any top geniuses with heaven-grade ancestral Tao roots like Xianmi Heavenly Region, but their requirements weren't high. So, if they were able to obtain a profound grade ancestral Tao root, then they would have profited. If they were able to obtain an earth-grade ancestral Tao root, then they would have profited greatly. Of course, they wouldn't let go of even the lowest yellow-grade ancestral Tao root. After all, those that possessed ancestral Tao roots could be considered as geniuses, and all of them had the potential to attain the Tao. However, the higher the grade of the Tao root, the higher the success rate of attaining the Tao. Moreover, after attaining the Tao, one's cultivation speed would be much faster and stronger than other cultivators. The ancestral Tao roots possessed by true almighty figures in the Xianmi Heavenly Region were at least at the earth grade, and there were also extremely terrifying heaven-grade ancestral Tao roots. Generally speaking, as long as a cultivator who possessed a formidable Tao root didn't perish, then without exception, all of them would become formidable almighty figures. They didn't get my permission to erect the stone tablet in the mission hall, did they? Zhuan narrowed his eyes and said indifferently. Magatama and Yuezu's hearts skipped a beat as they thought to themselves, these are experts from the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, and they are all Heavenly Tao experts. Could it be that Zhuan is planning to cause trouble for them? They felt disbelief because there were at least a few tens of cultivators from the Xianmi Heavenly Region that had come to the mission hall this time, and all of them possessed extremely vast auras. Could it be that Zhuan intends to cause trouble for these experts? Even though Zhuan had killed Sakyamune and injured Sun Qi from the Xianmi Heavenly Region's Baihong Hall, they still didn't think that Zhuan was capable of going against a few tens of experts who had attained the Tao by himself, because this was simply an act of courting death. Region Lord, you intend to? Magatama asked cautiously. They arrogantly erected the stone tablet in the mission hall of the Wind Snow Palace and even publicly tested their ancestral Dao roots to recruit members from our Xianmi heavenly region. Don't you think they've gone too far? They don't take our Wind Snow Palace seriously at all. Zhuan spoke coldly. When Magatama and Yuezu heard this, they had a bad feeling in their hearts. They didn't expect that Zhuan really intended to seek an explanation from those cultivators from the Xianmi heavenly region. Region Lord, there are a few tens of people from the Xianmi heavenly region that have come to our Great Brahma heavenly region. Moreover, I'm guessing that all of them are experts who have attained the Tao. Moreover, they haven't done anything out of line. I think we don't need to have a conflict with them, right? Yuezu said cautiously. Zhuan said indifferently, let's go to the mission hall first. After saying that, Zhuan took the lead and walked towards the mission hall. Yuezu and Magatama looked at each other and saw the worry in each other's eyes. Even though they hadn't been in contact with Zhuan for a long time, they knew Zhuan's character. They knew that he was someone who could be persuaded by reason but not cowed by force. They were really afraid that after Zhuan entered the mission hall, he would have a conflict with those experts. However, they weren't the region lord. The real region lord was Zhuan, so they couldn't disobey Zhuan's orders. At this moment, the huge mission hall was no longer lively and bustling like before. Instead, it seemed extremely cold and cheerless. Interestingly, most of the cultivators were basically standing at the entrance of the mission hall. If one looked carefully, there was an invisible barrier set up at the entrance, preventing the cultivators at the entrance from entering the mission hall. Inside the mission hall, there was a stone tablet that was several feet high. The surface of this stone tablet had a metallic texture, and its surface was covered with complex lines, giving it a mysterious aura. At this moment, dozens of people surrounded the stone tablet. These dozens of people followed two people's lead. These two people were a sturdy middle-aged man wearing a vest that exposed his strong arms, and the other person was an old man wearing a long cloth robe with a goatee. Based on the gazes of the people in the surroundings, it was obvious that these two people were probably the strongest people here. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to reveal expressions of fear and reverence. At a rather corner of the mission hall, a tall woman in a cheongsam had her legs crossed and her arms crossed over her chest. She was an extremely sexy woman, especially her slender legs that were hidden under her dress. The fair skin that was exposed had a moving glow to it, and it caused others to be unable to help but want to pry into the secrets behind it. An enormous iron giant stood by the woman in the cheongsam. The iron giant was 6 feet tall, and the woman in the cheongsam only reached the iron giant's waist. The iron giant's eyes were suffused with a faint red glow, and it didn't say a word. It didn't seem like a human. How ignorant! How could a true genius be born in a barren and backward place like the Eight Heavens? You're already lucky to find a cultivator with a yellow rank ancestral Dao root. Our violet red house really disdains to recruit such a disciple with a trash ancestral Dao root. The sexy woman in the cheongsam shook her head lightly as she gazed at the cultivators that entered the mission hall in an orderly manner and took the test on the stone tablet. The test had already been carried out for a few days. Unfortunately, a true genius with an ancestral Dao root hadn't appeared until now. Not even a yellow rank ancestral Dao root had appeared. Chapter 2639. Earth-grade Dao root. The woman in the cheongsam had always been against coming to the Eight Heavens to recruit cultivators. Instead, she wanted to follow Master Yuan Hui to the gap in the primitive heavenly domain to help seal it. Unfortunately, Master Yuan Hui was too arrogant. He didn't care about them at all. After entering the Eight Heavens, he went to the gap alone and warned them not to follow him. If they followed him, it would be equivalent to offending Master Yuan Hui. Master Yuan Hui was an eternal great formation Dao Godmaster. He wasn't from any of the powers behind them. He was the Huangji clan's formation Dao Godmaster. The Huangji clan was a colossus in the host region. They were a true Dao Palace level power. Even the purple-red house behind the woman in the cheongsam couldn't compare to them. After all, the purple-red house was only a Dao sect level power. Moreover, it was a relatively weak Dao sect level power. In front of a powerful power like the Huangji clan, Even 10 purple-red houses wouldn't be enough. They didn't dare to disobey Master Yuan Hui's words. Therefore, they could only stay in the Great Brahma domain and wait for news from Master Yuan Hui. The cultivators who came to escort Master Yuan Hui didn't belong to the same power. Each of them was only a representative of a power in the host region. Among this group, the woman in the Cheongsam knew that only 2 people came from Dao sect-level powers like her. The rest were just ordinary powers. These people came to escort Master Yuan Hui to curry favor with Master Yuan Hui. They hoped to leave a good impression on Master Yuan Hui. After all, if they could build a good relationship with an eternal grade formation Dao God Master like Master Yuan Hui, they would have a smooth journey in the Shenmi heavenly domain. They might even be able to ask Master Yuan Hui to refine powerful formations for them. It was because of this that so many cultivators took the initiative to escort Master Yuan Hui. Even though Master Yuan Hui had brought the Huangji clan's bodyguards with him, these people still stuck to Master Yuan Hui like sticky candy. Before arriving at the 8 heavens, Master Yuan Hui didn't say anything. As soon as he arrived, he immediately chased them away. This made the cultivators who were scheming feel disappointed. The cultivators who were left behind started to target the cultivators in the 8 heavens. They hoped to find geniuses with heaven-defying Dao roots in the 8 heavens. Unfortunately, the results of the tests over the past few days had left them extremely disappointed. Yuan Hui, why did my father send me to such a boring place? How boring, the woman in the Cheongsam said in boredom. Young mistress, don't forget the mission. The steel giant standing beside the Cheongsam woman reminded in a low, muffled voice. The Cheongsam woman curled her lips and said, "My father sent you to spy on me, right? You talk about missions every day. I wouldn't dare." The steel's giant lowered his head, but his voice was still emotionless. "Forget it, telling you is like playing the lute to a cow. It's boring. Do you really think the 8 heavens are hiding the origin of the starry sky? Besides, we're not the only ones who know about it, right? The other powers must know about it as well," the woman in the Cheongsam said. The steel giant nodded and pondered for a moment before saying, "That's right. Otherwise, why would so many forces from the Shenmi heavenly domains send people to the 8 heavens? We can only be considered as the early batch. There will be more cultivators coming to the 8 heavens in the future. Their goal is the so-called land of origin. What's in the origin of the starry sky that made so many powers from Shenmi heaven put in so much effort? I remember that the origin of the starry sky only came out recently. Who spread the news?" The woman in the Cheongsam analyzed. "Young lady, your guess is correct. I heard that this news was spread by Traceless Blood. Traceless Blood chased a witch race cultivator hundreds of thousands of years ago and inadvertently entered the 8 heavens. He was trapped in the 8 heavens for hundreds of thousands of years and learned many things about the 8 heavens." The steel's giant said. "Traceless Blood? Is it Traceless Blood from the blood prison?" The woman in the Cheongsam was startled and a trace of disgust appeared in her beautiful eyes. Traceless Blood and the blood prison were notorious forces in Shenmi heaven, but at the same time, they were also a force that made people tremble in fear. Because the blood prison was a force that specialized in training assassins. The assassins they trained would kill no one. As long as you could pay them, the blood prison would basically accept the task of killing. They had done many heartless things. The woman in the Cheongsam had always kept a respectful distance from this kind of assassin force, so she naturally didn't have a good impression of the blood prison. "Do you really believe Traceless Blood's words?" The woman in the Cheongsam looked at the steel's giant speechlessly. The steel's red eyes flashed with the brilliance of wisdom as he said in a deep voice, "The blood prison wouldn't dare. If this news was released, it would spread like wildfire. If the news is false, the blood prison will become the target of public criticism. Although the blood prison station is mysterious and is a Dao Palace level force, it can't withstand the condemnation of many forces, so the blood prison won't do such a thankless thing." The woman in the Cheongsam sneered and said, "Since Traceless Blood knows that there is a starry sky source in the 8 heavens, why didn't he investigate it and instead release this news? Because he doesn't know the specific location. The reason why he released this news should be because he has the idea that there is strength in numbers. After all, once the starry sky source is discovered, no force in Xianmi heaven can swallow it. It will inevitably be divided. The blood prison is not weak, so when the time comes, they will naturally be able to get a share of it, the steel's giant said lightly. What? Suddenly, a noise sounded in front of the stone steel, attracting the attention of the woman in the Cheongsam and the steel's giant. After that, both of them noticed with surprise that the stone steel that stood at the center of the assignment hall was emanating a dazzling yellow light at this moment. Moreover, at the moment the yellow light arrived at its most blazing, it suddenly transformed into an azure color, and then the azure color changed once more to brown. In the end, the light stopped at brown before slowly being extinguished. This is an earth-rank ancestral Dao root? The woman in the Cheongsam muttered with a voice that was filled with disbelief. The steel's giant was shocked as well. However, his entire body was made of steel, and the only thing that revealed his emotions was his red eyes. Young miss, looks like a genius with an earth-rank ancestral Dao root can appear in the 8 heavens. We can't let such a genius go. The steel's giant spoke hurriedly. The woman in the Cheongsam nodded. There was no need for the steel's giant to speak before she'd already flashed towards the stone steel, and in next to no time, she arrived around the stone steel. Only now did she see clearly that it was a young woman who'd been tested to possess an earth-rank ancestral Dao root. This woman was extremely beautiful. Moreover, the space between her brows revealed a heroic aura, and it caused her entire body to emanate an extraordinary aura. Chapter 2640. My territory. Ha! Little girl, what's your name? The middle-aged man's rugged face was filled with a kind expression. However, this middle-aged man was truly too rugged and even seemed to be slightly ferocious. So, revealing a kind expression just like this caused the middle-aged man to seem even more ferocious. Gui, you truly look too ferocious. Fuck off. The old man with a goatee pushed the middle-aged man away and gazed at the young woman with a pleasant expression. Little girl, I'm Sherhuai, a member of Sky Crane Lodge. Perhaps you don't know Sky Crane Lodge. Let me tell you, Sky Crane Lodge is a Taoist sect-level power in Xianmi region, and this alone already surpasses many other powers. So long as you join Sky Crane Lodge, then I guarantee that you'll be able to smoothly attain the Tao and step foot into the second step of Tao attainment. It's even to the extent that you'll be able to enjoy all the benefits of Sky Crane Lodge. Damnable old bastard. The middle-aged man cursed loudly, and then he walked over to the side and gazed at the young woman with a pleasant expression. I'm Gui, a member of Lousy Gorge. Moreover, Lousy Gorge is a Taoist sect-level power as well, and it's even slightly stronger than this old bastard Sky Crane Lodge. If you join Lousy Gorge, then we'll agree to all the conditions of Lousy Gorge, and we can even make an exception and promote you to become the next master of Lousy Gorge. The old man's expression changed slightly. Gui is really ruthless. He actually directly raised such a condition. However, Sherhuai was surprised because Gui's status in Lousy Gorge wasn't so high. So how could he possibly possess the authority to make someone become the next master of Lousy Gorge? Little girl, don't listen to this fellow's nonsense. He's only the master of the Heaven Tao, and he's only an inner court disciple in Lousy Gorge. How could he possibly possess such great authority? You'll definitely be tricked by him if you follow him, said Sherhuai. Gui glared angrily. He was very displeased that Sherhuai had exposed him, but he couldn't refute it. He'd really been bragging about the conditions from before, and he really didn't possess such great authority. However, with the natural endowment of an Earth Tao root, Gui knew that the master of Lousy Gorge would definitely attach great importance to it, and it was only a matter of time before this young woman became his successor. After all, a cultivator who possessed an Earth Tao root would definitely be able to attain the second step of Tao attainment in the future, and if they were lucky, then it was even possible for them to come into contact with the third step. Apart from Gui and Sherhuai, there were representatives from other forces around them. However, these representatives were as silent as cicadas in winter, not daring to have the urge to interrupt. Regardless of whether it was Gui or Sherhuai, both of them were only heavenly Tao masters, which was not much different from them. However, The forces behind Gui and Shihui were much more powerful than them. They were just ordinary forces, but these two people were backed by Taoist forces. If they offended these two people, the forces behind them would suffer. Even though they coveted this woman who possessed an earth-rank ancestral Tao root as well, they didn't dare compete with Gui and Shihui for her. At this moment, the woman in Cheongsam had already arrived in front of the stone tablet. Seeing Shihui and Gui fighting over it, she could not help but find it funny. Just as she was about to speak, an indifferent voice came from the depths of the mission hall. Did you get my permission to erect the stone tablet here? Did you get my permission to test my people here? And now, all of you want to take this person as your disciple. Did you get my permission? The voice was indifferent yet filled with energy, and it spread throughout the hall. Within the hall, Shihui and Gui, who were arguing, immediately stopped, and they gazed with hostile gazes at the white-clothed young man who walked out from the depths of the hall. The beautiful eyes of the woman in Cheongsam even spun about, and her attention had descended onto the white-clothed young man as well. The peak of the extremes of life and death? When she noticed that the white-clothed young man's cultivation was merely at the peak of the extremes of life and death, a trace of disdain and indifference appeared in her beautiful eyes. The cultivators gathered around the stone tablet were all heavenly Tao masters. Amongst them, Gui and Shihui were even at the peak of the heavenly Tao master realm. They possessed extraordinary strengths and numerous trump cards. Even a single heavenly Tao master wouldn't dare berate so casually when facing so many heavenly Tao masters. Yet now, when facing a few dozen heavenly Tao masters, not only had this young man who was merely at the extremes of life and death spoken those words, he even had a calm expression as if there was nothing wrong with what he'd said just now. The woman in Cheongsam sneered in her heart. She felt that this white-clothed young man was too arrogant. How could he berate them with such a weak cultivation? Magatama and Yuezu, who were following behind Juan, were so scared that their legs went weak. In fact, both of them had long known that the cultivators around the stone tablet in the past few days were all ferocious people from the Xianmi heavenly domain. Their strengths were extremely terrifying, and they were all Tao validation experts. Any one of them was an existence that they looked up to, and even if they wanted to kill them, it would be as easy as squashing an ant. Originally, while following Juan, both of them had vaguely hinted to Juan that these people were not to be trifled with, and each of them was a powerful existence. However, judging from the current situation, Juan had ignored their warning. It's over. The domain master is too impulsive. No matter how powerful he is, he can't withstand so many experts. This was the real thought of Magatama and Yuezu at the moment, and they couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. The cultivators who were blocked by the invisible barrier outside the hall all showed eager expressions. Naturally, they recognized Zhuowen's identity. It's the domain master. The domain master has finally come out of seclusion. I didn't expect him to be so domineering as soon as he came out. Some cultivators were very excited and felt that the domain master's actions were really too hardy. The domain master is too impulsive. These people are all Tao validation experts. The domain master can't possibly be their opponents. It's really unwise to offend these people now. Some people were full of worry and felt that Zhuowen's actions were unthoughtful. Shihui and Gui looked at Zhuowen coldly. Among them, Gui had a more fiery temper. He looked at Zhuowen coldly and said, "Who are you? How dare you interrupt us and speak such arrogant words?" Zhuowen calmly looked at Gui. Under the desperate eyes of Magatama and Yuezu, Zhuowen said calmly, "I am the lord of the great Brahma domain. This is my territory. You are so presumptuous in my territory, and you dare to question me?" Gui was stunned. He didn't expect that the white-robed young man in front of him would be so courageous. He even dared to speak such arrogant words. Couldn't this guy see that they were from the Xianmi heavenly domain? Even if he couldn't see it, couldn't he sense that their cultivation was much stronger than his? Or could it be that this fellow was simply insensitive? Who do you think you are? How dare you speak to me? Even if you are the lord of the heavenly domain, you have to kneel in front of me. You are just a life and death realm cultivator. What qualifications do you have to be arrogant? Around the stone tablet, A skinny man who looked like a bamboo pole coldly snorted, jumped up, and punched toward Jun. Wherever the fist passed, Dao charms superimposed, shocking everyone who was watching. The power of this punch was far beyond the life and death realm cultivators. Zhuowen sneered. His doppelganger had just advanced, and his main body had also reached the peak of the life and death realm. In addition, his doppelganger was in his main body, so he really didn't fear these people. Boom! Chapter 2641. One punch. This guy is crazy. Gui and Shihui looked coldly at Zhuowen as if they were looking at a dead man. In their eyes, the lords of the 8 heavens were just decorations. They hadn't even reached the Tao-confirming realm, so how could they be qualified to speak in front of them? Not to mention taking a place in the Great Brahma domain to test one's Tao root. Even if he took the entire Great Brahma domain, it would be a trivial matter in their eyes. After all, they were the true heavenly Tao masters. They also knew that with their cultivation, they were supreme existences in the 8 heavens. But this white-robed young man in front of them was extremely arrogant. He was just at the life and death extremes, yet he dared to provoke them. It was no different from courting death. The woman in the Cheongsam shook her head secretly. Although she didn't know the skinny man, she knew that he was a heavenly Tao master. Although he was only at the initial stage of the heavenly Tao master, he was far stronger than the life and death extremes. This white-robed young man, who claimed to be the lord of the Great Brahma domain, would soon die in front of them. The cultivators of the Great Brahma domain, who were blocked by the invisible barrier, couldn't bear to see this scene. They knew that Jun was very strong and was recognized as the strongest person in the Great Brahma domain. But that was only limited to the Great Brahma domain. In their opinion, Jun might not even be stronger than Sakyamuni. The group of people in front of them were all Tao-confirming realm experts from the Xianmi heavenly domain. Just the invisible aura they emitted was enough to make them tremble with fear. No matter how strong Zhuowen was, he was like an ant in front of this group of Tao-confirming realm experts. As the cultivators of the Great Brahma domain sighed helplessly and the experts of the Xianmi heavenly domain looked on mockingly, Zhuowen's punch finally collided with the skinny man. A ball of light, like a scorching sun, suddenly exploded from the collision between the two. Then, a powerful force produced a powerful wave of air that spread continuously in all directions. The powerful sound wave produced by the violent collision spread continuously in all directions, causing some of the people in the surroundings to involuntarily cover their ears. This spreading sound wave contained a unique Tao rhyme aura and a powerful trace of the heavenly Tao. If an ordinary life and death extremes expert were near this sound wave, they would definitely be torn apart by this Tao rhyme. However, Zhuowen stood unmoving like a boulder in front of everyone's incredulous gazes. On the other hand, the skinny man's expression became increasingly ugly. After which, he spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backwards miserably, smashing into the ground not far from the stone tablet. At this moment, the large hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes were gathered on the skinny man who had been knocked to the ground. Eyes, and many other inexplicable emotions. It was a long while later before a wave-like uproar was stirred. The numerous gazes that had originally landed on the skinny man had all turned towards the white-clothed young man in front of him, who stood like an immovable mountain. What happened just now? Am I seeing things? That expert from the Xianmi heavenly domain was actually knocked to the ground. You're not seeing things. He was indeed knocked to the ground. Moreover, it was the domain lord who defeated him. This is so strong. Isn't this a Tao-confirming expert? Why does he look so weak? It's not that the expert from the Xianmi heavenly domain is weak, but our domain lord is hiding his strength. Outside the hall, many cultivators from the Dafan heavenly domain cheered. Their eyes were filled with excitement and reverence. When the experts from the Xianmi heavenly domain arrived here, they basically used a commanding tone. They had long disliked the strength of these experts from the Xianmi heavenly domain. However, their strength was far inferior to these experts, so they could only swallow their anger. Now, Yun, the domain lord who represented their Dafan heavenly domain, was actually able to gain the upper hand in a head-on confrontation with one of the experts. For them, This was undoubtedly something worth encouraging. Compared to the liveliness at the entrance of the hall, the experts from the Xianmi heavenly domain around the stone tablet were silent. One of the cultivators came to the side of the thin man and observed for a while. His eyes became extremely gloomy. "He's seriously injured. I'm afraid it'll take at least half a year for him to recover," the cultivator said with a heavy expression. The others fell silent. Most of them were from the ordinary forces of the Xianmi heavenly domain. Their strength was about the same as the thin man, and they were only at the initial stage of the heavenly Tao Lord. Even so, they could be considered as the mainstay of their respective forces. They couldn't be casually lost. Otherwise, it would be enough to cause serious damage to the forces behind them. The white-clothed young man in front of them had seriously injured the thin man in a head-on confrontation. It was obvious that the white-clothed young man was not simple. In addition, they basically came from different forces. Moreover, they were only there to serve as a foil for the selection of geniuses. The real choice was in the hands of Gui, Shihuai, and the woman in the Chongsam. After knowing that the white-clothed young man was a tough nut to crack, they naturally couldn't take the initiative to step forward and ask for trouble. The woman in the Chongsam looked surprised. She carefully sized up the white-clothed Jun. Her beautiful peach blossom eyes seemed to be able to see through the white-clothed young man in front of her. But no matter how she sized him up, she still felt that the white-clothed young man was only at the two extremes of life and death. There was no aura of the way on him at all. This was really too strange. When did the two extremes of life and death become so abnormal that he could actually kill a heavenly Tao Lord like the thin man in a second? Although there were such monsters in the Xianmi heavenly domain, such monsters were all geniuses who were focused on cultivating by powerful forces at the Tao Palace level or above. However, the white-clothed young man in front of them was only from the 8 heavenly domains. How could such a monster be born in such a poor cultivation environment? If this was really the case, then how terrifying was the talent of the white-clothed young man in front of them? On the other hand, Gui and Shihuai were surprised and bewildered. Even though the thin man's strength was much inferior to them, he was the heavenly Tao Lord at any rate, right? Even if it was the two of them, it wouldn't be so easy for them to injure him with a single punch. But this young man who called himself the Region Lord of the Dafan region had actually accomplished it right before their eyes. This was truly inconceivable. Big Brother Zhua. Suddenly, the young woman that was tested to possess an Earth Tao root had charged out and arrived by Zhuowen's side. Because their attention had been constantly on Zhuowen, Shihuai and Gui had been caught off guard and allowed the young woman to slip away. Chapter 2642. Renchuan gazed at the woman before him, and his gaze revealed a trace of gentleness as he said, "Junior Sister Qi, congratulations. You actually possess an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root. Your future is limitless." Jun had heard about ancestral Tao roots from Mu Chenxue. When Mu Chenxue went to Hu Divine Temple all those years ago, Sun Qi had tested the ancestral Tao roots of the representatives of the various territories. He knew that Yao Xiangjuan possessed a profound grade ancestral Tao root, and it could be considered to be a very good ancestral Tao root. On the other hand, the Nadi Shiva's ancestral Tao root had exceeded Zhuowen's expectations, and it was actually an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root. Fortunately, the Nadi Shiva had been completely eliminated by Zhuowen. Otherwise, if he allowed her to continue cultivating in Xianmi Heavenly Region, then she would probably be quite a big threat to him. However, Zhuowen had never imagined that Tong Chimei would actually possess an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root as well. After all, even in Xianmi Heavenly Region, such an ancestral Tao root was a 1 in a million genius. Tong Chimei possessed an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root, so her future was limitless indeed. Tong Chimei was still slightly puzzled until now. It was the first time she'd heard of an ancestral Tao root, and it seemed like possessing an ancestral Tao root was equivalent to possessing the qualifications to attain the Tao. Now, when she saw Zhuowen congratulate her, she felt slightly uneasy instead, and she hurriedly explained, "Big Brother Zhua, I don't intend to head to Xianmi Heavenly Region. I'm a member of Snow Palace, so I won't." Zhuowen interrupted Tong Chimei and said, "Junior Sister Chimei, there's no need to panic. It's a good thing that you possess an Earth-grade ancestral Tao root. A genius like you will definitely possess great accomplishments in Xianmi Heavenly Region. However, I won't allow you to casually join some powers, and I'll definitely help you choose a power that's suitable for you. Besides that, leaving the 8 great heavens is only a matter of time. There'll be a great calamity here in the future, and both of us won't be able to escape it. Staying here will only increase the sacrifices. Zhuan spoke the last sentence via voice transmission. Tong Chimei was stunned, and then she nodded obediently and said, "Big brother Zhua, I'll listen to you." "Who exactly are you?" Gui Yi looked gloomily at Zhuan, who was talking to Tong Chimei, and said coldly. Zhuan looked at Gui Yi and said calmly, "Didn't I say it before? I am the domain lord of the Great Brahma Domain, and this mission hall and the Wind Snow Palace are both my territories. You came to my territory without my permission and took away my people. Isn't this like a turtle dove occupying a magpie's nest?" Gui Yi frowned slightly and said coldly, "Although you have some skill, you should know that you are facing someone you can't afford to offend. I am the representative of Xianmi Heavenly Domain's Broken Valley. I am just borrowing your territory. Moreover, without us, how could you cultivators have the ability to go to the Xianmi Heavenly Domain on your own? This is the only way for you to leave the Xianmi Heavenly Domain. After all, the Heavenly Moat is extremely dangerous. Even first-step Tao confirming experts have the risk of dying there." As soon as Gui Yi's words came out, many cultivators at the entrance of the hall were moved. The matter of the Xianmi Heavenly Domain was no longer a secret. Everyone knew that there was a heavenly moat in the extraterritorial starry sky, and on the other side of the heavenly moat was the legendary 9th heaven, the Xianmi Heavenly Domain. Many cultivators even believed that as long as they entered the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, they would be able to smoothly reach Tao confirming, obtain better cultivation resources, and have a better future. Most of them longed for the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, but they also knew that the heavenly moat was extremely terrifying. If they were not Tao confirming cultivators, they would be courting death if they went there. However, Gui Yi's words were extremely tempting. Even if he had not reached the Tao confirming realm, he could still take everyone to the Xianmi Heavenly Domain. Zhuan looked at Gui Yi, his eyes flashing, and said lightly, "What did you rely on to get here?" The dozens of people in front of him obviously came together. Most likely, they had some kind of flying divine tool that could allow them to cross the heavenly moat. Zhuan only knew about the heavenly moat from the records of the Great Brahma Domain. As for how dangerous the heavenly moat was, Zhuan had never personally experienced it. Zhuan was guessing whether his space-time roulette could cross the heavenly moat. Gui Yi said proudly, "If you want to cross the heavenly moat, you must have a special flying ship. However, you don't need to know what it is. This is our secret." Zhuan squinted his eyes and looked at Gui Yi unkindly. He knew that this fella said this on purpose. "You can say that we are helping you by selecting talents here. Your 8 heavenly domains will not be peaceful soon, and there might even be a great calamity. The longer you stay here, the more dangerous it will be. I am helping you by taking you with me." Shi Huai also came out to speak, and he spoke loudly towards the entrance of the hall. The noisy crowd of cultivators at the entrance of the main hall quieted down. Their eyes were filled with hope and hope. If they were chosen, they would be able to directly enter the Xianmi Heavenly Region. Some cultivators even started to complain that Zhuan interfered with their test. Therefore, their complaints were not loud. However, with Zhuan's current cultivation, he naturally heard them clearly. Zhuan shook his head and sighed in his heart. He knew that these cultivators were only convinced by his strength. Once he, Zhuan, failed to protect them, they would immediately betray him. Originally, Zhuan wanted to help these cultivators of the Wind Snow Palace. However, his interest was waning now. "Brother Zhua, you are not a saint. You are also a human. You don't need everyone to help you. You only need to help your friends and family who are worthy of your trust. After all, a person's strength is limited." Beside Zhuan, Tong Chimei also noticed Zhuan's strange state. She also heard the complaints from the crowd. She quickly persuaded Zhuan in a low voice. "I know this." Zhuan nodded. He looked at Gui Yi and Shi Huai and said, "As long as they agree to take the test, I will not object. However, The Wind Snow Palace is my territory. Now get out. If you want to take the test, just choose a square outside. Save me the trouble of looking at you. Zhuowen's words were not polite at all. Immediately, the experts of the Xianmi heavenly domain around the stone tablet glared at him. They felt that this domain lord of the great Brahma heavenly domain was too arrogant. He had only defeated one of them. Moreover, he was the weakest among them. Yet he dared to challenge them so openly. If they moved the test stone tablet out because of this person's words, when this matter spread to the Xianmi heavenly domain, they would lose all their face. Gui and Shihuai's expressions were not good. They looked coldly at Zhuo. It is indeed wrong for us to set up the test stone tablet here without your permission. How about this? We can pay you the corresponding rent. Shihuai's eyes revealed a sly look as he said rather amiably. Gui Yi's eyes lit up. He glanced at Shihuai. Apparently, he also thought of Shihuai's idea. However, he did not say anything. This group of people were all heavenly Tao masters, and some of them came from powerful Taoist sections. Yet, none of them actually had high-class heavenly Tao origin crystals. From this, it could be seen just how precious high-grade heavenly law origin crystals were. As for the special-grade Heaven's Path origin crystals, they were even more precious than high-grade Heaven's Path origin crystals. When he thought about how he had used up the only 20 special-grade heavenly Tao origin crystals on him, Yun felt a faint heartache. However, he did not regret it. At least those 20 special-grade heavenly Tao origin crystals had allowed his clone to successfully advance to the 2-star realm. However, Yun was a little worried about his clone's future path of advancement. Just advancing from 1-star to 2-star required such a terrifying amount of energy. Coupled with the preciousness of the special-grade heavenly Tao origin crystals, wouldn't his clone need even more special-grade heavenly Tao origin crystals to advance to a higher level in the future? Thinking of this, Yun felt a little vexed. Shihuai's gaze was cold as he said, "Aren't you being too arrogant? We've already made concessions, yet you're still pushing your luck. Do you really think we're easy to bully?" As he spoke, Shihuai took a step forward, and his powerful aura poured out without holding back at all. On the other hand, Gui took a step forward with Shihuai, and his gaze was extremely cold and indifferent as well. A disdainful smile appeared on the corners of Zhuowen's mouth. Shihuai and Gui were indeed slightly stronger than the others here. Based on their auras, it was obvious that they were probably peak heavenly law lords. What was worth Zhuowen's attention was that the steel giant standing beside the woman in the Cheongsam gave Zhuowen a sense of danger. Obviously, the strongest in this group was probably not Shihuai and Gui, but the steel giant that had never spoken a word. He doesn't know how to appreciate kindness. The Cheongsam woman shook her head. She felt that Zhuowen was pushing his luck. On the other hand, the steel giant suddenly spoke. Instead of saying that he's pushing his luck, I feel that we're pushing our luck too far. This is his territory, so he's naturally displeased by our sudden intrusion. If he was just a weakling, then he would naturally not dare to go head-on against us. However, he isn't weak, and he's even very strong. Any expert would absolutely not allow others to casually bully them like this. Moreover, as far as I'm concerned, he's already shown mercy to us. At the very least, he didn't attack us right away and just asked us to tear down the stone steel and test it. That request isn't going too far. It's Shihuai and Gui who've gone too far. The Cheongsam woman gazed at the steel giant with surprise. She was clearly aware that this bodyguard by her side had a taciturn character and didn't really like to talk. However, the steel giant had actually spoken so much because of the white-clothed young man. She could discern that the steel giant attached great importance to the white-clothed young man. The Cheongsam woman asked casually, Shihuai and Gui are both peak heavenly law lords, and they're much stronger than that fellow from before. Moreover, they've joined forces. How many moves do you think that kid can resist against their joint forces? My lady, you think too highly of Shihuai and Gui. As far as I'm concerned, neither of them is a match for this kid. The steel giant said firmly. The Cheongsam woman's pupils shrank as she looked at the steel giant seriously. Seeing that the steel giant didn't seem to be joking, she felt very uneasy. She didn't doubt the steel giant's judgment because the steel giant was very strong, far stronger than anyone else present. He was a true powerhouse of the Purple-Red House, and his strength was at least that of a Daoyuan master. Moreover, the steel giant was only guessing that the steel giant was a Daoyuan master. The Cheongsam woman had never seen the steel giant use his full strength. Even her father had great respect for the steel giant, which spoke volumes of the steel giant's strength. Although the steel giant had a very high opinion of Zhuowen, the Cheongsam woman still didn't think much of it. In this regard, she still insisted that the white-clothed young man couldn't possibly be a match for Shi Huai and Gui Yi when they joined forces. The steel giant also felt the Cheongsam woman's disapproval, but he didn't say anything else. He knew that this kind of thing didn't have much credibility. Chapter 2644. Shi Huai and Gui Yi teamed up. At this moment, the atmosphere in the mission hall was extremely solemn. The people on the stone tablet could not help but take a few steps back, leaving only Shi Huai and Gui Yi standing side by side. Their eyes were filled with ridicule. Although Zhuowen had shocked everyone by injuring the skinny man with a single move, Shi Huai and Gui Yi were not people that the skinny man could compare to. Moreover, Shi Huai and Gui Yi were both peak Heavenly Dao masters. They were much stronger than the skinny man. Moreover, the two of them had teamed up to deal with the white-clothed young man. In their opinion, with Shi Huai and Gui Yi teaming up, they would definitely be able to defeat the white-clothed young man. Brother Zhua! Governor! Tong Chimei, Magatama, and Yuezu stood behind Zhuowen and looked at Zhuowen worriedly. The cultivators outside the hall also quieted down. They didn't say anything to cheer for Zhuowen. Most of them were worried that if they supported Zhuowen in this battle, the experts from the Xianmi Heavenly Domain would make things difficult for them and would not bring them to the Xianmi Heavenly Domain. Even though Zhuowen was their governor, they all kept silent. It was as if Zhuowen's battle had nothing to do with them. Zhuowen saw everyone's reaction. Although he looked calm on the surface, he was still a little disappointed. At this moment, Shi Huai and Gui Yi had already dashed out. They turned into two streams of flowing light and rushed toward Zhuowen from the left and right. Their Taoist rhymes spread out like waves in the surrounding space. The terrifying Taoist rhymes roared like a tsunami and filled the entire mission hall. The originally sturdy mission hall could not withstand the terrifying aura of Taoist rhymes and started to crack. Even the experts from the Xianmi Heavenly Domain around the stone tablet retreated. They did not dare to get too close to Shi Huai and Gui Yi. The cultivators outside the hall had already retreated far away. The battle between the Heavenly Dao Masters was not something they could casually interfere with. Even if they got close, they risked being killed. Therefore, they had to be careful. Rumble. Before Shi Huai and Gui Yi could even get close to Zhuowen, the mission hall was finally unable to withstand the terrifying pressure and turned into dust. The originally majestic mission hall was now in ruins. Zhuowen's expression was ugly. Although the mission hall had a level 9 defensive array that he had personally set up, it was still not enough. However, in the eyes of peak experts like Shi Huai and Gui Yi who were Heaven Dao Lords, the level 9 defensive hall was nothing. The two of you will pay for this. Zhuowen's voice was icy cold. He felt that he had made a mistake. Even if he wanted to fight with these two, he should have left the mission hall. That way, the mission hall wouldn't have been reduced to ruins. Shi Huai sneered. His right hand had taken out a white token at an unknown time. This token was covered in dense Dao patterns. This was a genuine Heavenly Dao grade divine artifact. Its Taoist rhyme was so powerful that it was as if the Heavenly Dao had personally descended. Gui Yi also took out a Heavenly Dao grade divine artifact. His divine artifact was a huge staff, much longer than himself. However, it was very thin, like an ordinary bamboo pole. At first glance, it looked very strange. Boom, boom. The moment Shi Huai and Gui Yi took out their respective Heavenly Dao grade divine artifacts, they blasted out powerful attacks toward Zhuowen. The blazing energy light completely engulfed Zhuowen's figure. Tong Chimei had already been pulled away by Magatama and Yuezu to a distance. She looked at the scene in horror. The attacks that Shi Huai and Gui Yi blasted out were too terrifying. The two of them couldn't help but have the urge to bow down and worship them. They couldn't even muster up the slightest thought of resisting. They knew that if they were to face such attacks, they could only kneel on the ground, close their eyes, and wait for death. As for Yun, their eyes were filled with worry. They didn't know if Zhuan could withstand such terrifying attacks. Once Zhuan fell, the two of them knew very well that the Wenshui Palace would be in chaos. Steel Plume, it seems like you've misjudged. This kid is only so. I'm afraid he's already fallen. The woman in the Cheongsam stood in the distance with her arms crossed. She couldn't help but shake her head as she watched the figure being engulfed by Shi Huai and Gui Yi's powerful attacks. The steel giant didn't speak. He just silently watched the battle in front of him, as if the battle hadn't ended yet. The woman in the Cheongsam curled her lips when she saw the steel giant's appearance. She looked forward lazily. Then her beautiful eyes shrank, revealing a look of horror. She saw that the attacks that Shi Huai and Gui Yi blasted out were suddenly broken by an even more powerful force. The white token and long stick flew back and fell into the hands of Shi Huai and Gui. As the light receded, a figure stood proudly. Around this figure was a gray long sword that was circling around him like a snake. At the same time, this person held two swords. One sword was surrounded by thunder and fire, while the other sword was filled with blood qi. These two swords were naturally the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword. During this period of time with Zhuan, the cultivation of the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword had not been neglected. At this moment, both of them had been promoted to the level of Heavenly Path Divine Weapons. It should be noted that when Zhuan was in seclusion, he had always released the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword when he was absorbing the special class Heavenly Path Origin Crystal. These two divine swords could be said to be bathed in the energy of the Heavenly Path Origin Crystal at all times. Even if they were only absorbing the Heavenly Path energy emitted from the special class Heavenly Path Origin Crystal, they would still benefit immensely. When the doppelganger successfully advanced to the two-star realm, the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword almost simultaneously became divine weapons of Dao validation. It could be said that Zhuan had 3 Heavenly Path divine swords, including the Death Sacrifice Sword. The moment he broke through Shi Huai and Gui Yi's attacks, Zhuan took a step forward. The Death Sacrifice Sword had already swept out and rushed towards Shi Huai and Gui. Zhuan followed closely behind like a maggot in a tarsal bone. Clang, clang. In just an instant, the Death Sacrifice Sword collided with the divine weapons in Shi Huai and Gui Yi's hands. The two of them worked together and naturally forced the Death Sacrifice Sword away. The moment the Death Sacrifice Sword was forced away, one was already closing in like a god descending from the heavens. Shi Huai and Gui Yi's expressions changed slightly. After all, Zhuowen's speed was just too fast. They had been focused on blasting away the sacrifice of Death Sword earlier and hadn't expected that Zhuowen would also come over. Of course, what surprised them even more was that Zhuan was actually unscathed. The two of them had joined forces and attacked with all their might, but they were unable to cause any injury to this person. This made them feel a chill in their hearts. They realized that they had somewhat underestimated this person. White Yingling. Shi Huai snorted coldly and pointed his sword finger at the token in his hand. Immediately, the token's surface lit up, and then endless white mist filled the air. In the depths of the rolling white mist, a huge white shadow appeared in front of Zhuowen as if it had teleported, blocking Zhuowen's advance. Zhuowen snorted coldly and flicked the Blood Immortal Sword in his left hand upwards. Instantly, blood-colored energy soared into the sky and turned into a huge pillar of blood, blasting away all the white mist. Chapter 2645. Instigate. Zhuowen stood in the air and slashed out with the Thunderfire Sword. Instantly, a terrifying thunderfire with the power to burn the heavens blasted into the void, leaving a huge ravine in the starry sky. The ravine was filled with dense thunderfire. The moment the white shadow was struck by the Thunderfire Sword, it collapsed and dissipated. Shi Huai let out a muffled groan and couldn't help but retreat as he looked at Zhuowen in horror. Fortunately, Gui Yi reacted quickly and swung his staff. Countless staff shadows fell like rain in front of Zhuowen, blocking Zhuowen's move that was sure to kill Shi Huai. Don't hold back, let's deal with him together, Gui Yi said to Shi Huai. His aura burst forth, and the long staff in his hands seemed to come alive. Layer after layer of staffs smashed toward Zhuo Wen in an endless stream. However, they managed to block Zhuo Wen's powerful attack, causing Zhuo Wen's attack on Shi Huai to slow down by quite a bit. Shi Huai also came to his senses and immediately took out the token. He activated the power of the token and joined forces with Gui Yi to attack Zhuo Wen. Zhuo Wen held his swords with both hands, looking like a god or a demon. When he swung his swords, they could burn the horizon, shatter the earth, and distort the starry sky. At the same time, the sacrificial death sword was shooting arrows from the shadows. Under the control of Zhuo Wen's powerful spiritual sense, it flew freely, causing Shi Huai and Gui Yi to be in a difficult situation. The two of them were originally at a disadvantage when facing Zhuo Wen, who wielded two swords. Now, with the addition of the sacrificial death sword, the two of them were naturally at a disadvantage. Especially when the sacrificial death sword was controlled by Zhuo Wen's spiritual sense, it was not the slightest bit inferior to an ordinary heavenly Dao master. This made their hearts sink. They had already overestimated Zhuo Wen as much as possible, but now that they were fighting, they realized that they had greatly underestimated him. This kid actually had 3 heavenly Dao divine artifacts, and his strength was actually so heaven-defying. Jun, on the other hand, was indifferent. He didn't even use the power of his doppelganger. Instead, he used the divine energy of his main body and his powerful spiritual sense to firmly suppress Shi Huai and Gui. Of course, if he only relied on the divine energy of his main body, it would be impossible for him to be a match for the two of them. However, Zhuo Wen was able to rely on 3 heavenly Dao-grade divine artifacts and his powerful divine sense to suppress the combined forces of Shi Huai and Gui. Of course, if Zhuo Wen used his doppelganger, he would be able to kill the two of them with a single punch. Of course, the heavenly Dao master's main body. Of the heavenly Dao master's main body. He knew very well that his main body's soul was far more powerful than others of the same level. Even a Dao affirmation expert might not necessarily be a match for his main body. Of Zhuo Wen had the heavenly Dao master's main body was of heavenly Dao master Zhuo Wen's main body. Now it seemed like he didn't just have the strength to fight, he'd even suppressed the joint forces of Shi Huai and Gui. The people in the surroundings were dumbstruck. Zhuo Wen is too abnormal. He's clearly only at the extremes of life and death, yet he's actually in an invincible position against the joint forces of 2 peak heavenly Dao masters. Moreover, he seems to have the upper hand. Big Brother Zhuo is so strong. Tong Qimei revealed a shocked expression, and then her eyes were filled with admiration. Magatama and Yuezu were completely stunned, and then they were overjoyed when they recovered from their shock. They hadn't expected Zhuo Wen's strength to be so terrifying. Shi Huai and Gui Yi were clearly the strongest amongst the group, yet they couldn't do anything to Zhuo Wen even after joining forces. Instead, they were suppressed. It was truly inconceivable. The region lord is actually so strong. Many cultivators outside the hall were dumbstruck, and they didn't know how to express their feelings at this moment. Are they really from the 8 great heavens? Is he really at the extremes of life and death? He's at the extremes of life and death that even Shi Huai and Gui Yi couldn't do anything to. He's heaven-defying. All the experts around the stone stele were dumbstruck, and they were in an uproar of disbelief. The woman in the Cheongsam watched this scene while her ample bosom rose and fell, and it carried a unique charm. How formidable! How could he be so formidable? She muttered slightly. The steel giant stood silently beside the woman in the Cheongsam, silently watching everything in front of him. He did not say a word, as if he had already guessed that this would happen. Suddenly, countless sword images swiftly slashed out from Zhuo Wen's hands. Shi Huai and Gui Yi's expressions changed slightly, and they couldn't help but retreat repeatedly. Just as the two of them retreated, a silent shadow took advantage of the gap between the two of them and stabbed towards Shi Huai's forehead. Shi Huai reacted swiftly and immediately dodged to the side. The phantom pierced through Shi Huai's shoulder blade, causing blood to spray as it pierced through Shi Huai's shoulder. Gui Yi's expression changed greatly, and he swung the long staff in his hand, smashing the sneak attack of the Death Sacrifice sword away. The Death Sacrifice sword didn't continue to attack after its successful attack, but instead fled into the starry sky like a viper waiting for its next prey. Seeing the death sacrifice sword disappear, Gui and Shi felt a headache coming on. After the battle earlier, they were actually not afraid of Zhuowen when they joined forces. However, the main reason they were at a disadvantage was because of the strange and unpredictable sacrificial death sword's continuous sneak attacks, causing the two of them to be exhausted from running for their lives. Therefore, it was able to succeed. As long as they could suppress the death sacrifice sword, the two of them wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Everyone who is willing to fight side by side with us. This boy is too arrogant, actually ignoring us. As cultivators from Xianmi Heavenly Domain, how can we be bullied by a cultivator from such a low-level heavenly domain? Shi suddenly said to the other cultivators behind the stone stele. Gui also hurriedly said, "Everyone, don't worry. As long as you can help us kill this boy, you will gain the friendship of my Broken Valley and Sky Crane abode. Moreover, we have the authority to let you enter the Broken Valley and Sky Crane abode to cultivate for a period of time." Originally, everyone snorted at Shi words, but Gui Yi's words completely moved them. The only difference between a Taoist sect-level force and a normal sect-level force was that a Taoist sect-level force could set up their own Taoist sect in the Xianmi Heavenly Domain and trigger the Heavenly Tao rules. Under the Taoist sect-level force, a powerful Heavenly Tao Dragon Vein would form. Because of the Heavenly Tao Dragon Vein, the disciples of a Tao sect-level force could cultivate much faster than ordinary forces. Chapter 2646. Fear and trepidation. Although Gui and Shi were not particularly important figures in their respective factions, they at least had a certain level of authority. It was still possible for them to give them preferential treatment and fight for a period of time to enter their factions to cultivate. Moreover, this kind of thing was actually something that many Taoist-level factions had. It was just that some Taoist-level factions' disciples did it very secretly, and the higher-ups simply did not know. Moreover, even if they knew, as long as there were no major changes, they would probably not care. After all, the Heavenly Tao Dragon Vein belonged to their Taoist-level factions. It was endless, and it was very difficult to exhaust it. Gui Yi's promise was truly related to their interests, so they really could not refuse. One had to know that there was a huge difference between cultivating in an ordinary place and on the Heavenly Tao Dragon Vein. Brother Gua must be joking. We are all cultivators of the Xianmi Heavenly region, so we should help each other. That's right. A mere life and death stage cultivator from the 8 great heavenly regions dares to be so arrogant with just 3 Heavenly Tao level artifacts. Today, we will teach this arrogant brat a good lesson on behalf of Brother Shi and Brother Gua. The people who were originally hesitating left the stone stele one after another and rushed toward Shi and Gui. Soon, they surrounded Shi and Gui. The people around the stone tablet quickly left, leaving only the Qipao woman and the steel giant standing not far away, unmoved by Gui Yi's words. "You guys are so despicable. You can't win, so you plan to gang up on him?" Tong Chimei's pretty face changed slightly, and could not help but criticize. Magatama and Yuezu were also extremely angry. Shi and the others could not be bothered with Tong Chimei's criticism. Instead, they coldly looked at Juan. "Brat, I underestimated you. However, no matter how strong you are, how strong can you be? Today I will kill you here." Shi Huai's eyes were gloomy as he looked at Juan, revealing traces of killing intent. Just now, the sacrifice death sword had pierced through his shoulder blade, causing him to lose all face. His killing intent toward Juan was boundless. Juan looked at the group of people in front of him indifferently, the corner of his mouth curling into a cold smile. "I think it's best if you guys don't participate in the battle between me and these two, otherwise, you will regret it." "Ha! Are you kidding me? Right now, you're already a fish on the chopping board. What qualifications do you have to be arrogant with us? Regret? Do you really not understand the current situation?" A cultivator sneered at Tun, his eyes full of mockery. Unfortunately, as soon as this cultivator finished speaking, a shadow suddenly swept towards the back of this cultivator's head like a poisonous snake. By the time the cultivator realized what was happening, it was already too late. The phantom pierced through the back of his head, causing blood to splatter everywhere. His head exploded and he died on the spot. The surrounding cultivators scattered, not daring to get close to this cultivator. Only then did they realize that the one who had suddenly killed this cultivator was a gray divine sword. It was Zhuowen's sacrificial death sword. "How dare you!" Gui roared. He took a step forward and smashed out his long stick. Countless stick shadows emitted blazing golden light. It was as if countless small suns had exploded. It was extremely terrifying. "Kill!" The moment Gui moved, Shihuai also took out his token and followed closely behind Gui. The other cultivators also blasted out their own attacks. All kinds of dazzling lights exploded in the air around Jun. It was extremely terrifying. Seeing this scene, the Cheongsam woman could not help but shake her head. Zhuowen's strength was indeed terrifying. Although he was only at the two extremes of life and death, he was able to suppress Shihuai and Gui so ruthlessly. But now, it was not just Shihuai and Gui. There were more than 40 people, and all of them were heavenly Dao masters. This was a terrifying force. No matter how powerful Zhuon was, it was destined that two fists would not be able to fight against four hands. Unless Zhuon was a true primordial Dao expert. But if Zhuon was really a primordial Dao expert, Shihuai and Gui would definitely have been able to crush him and not be in a stalemate with him. Not necessarily. Steel Plume said again. The Cheongsam woman was too lazy to pay attention to Steel Plume's words. With such a lineup, it was obvious that Zhuon was going to die. Steel Plume actually still had hope for Zhuon. This made the Cheongsam woman slightly disappointed in Steel Plume. Zhuowen's eyes were bloodthirsty. He looked at the surrounding cultivators with a murderous aura. Zhuon took a step forward and slashed out two swords with both hands. Shihuai and Gui were forced to retreat. Shihuai and Gui's expressions changed greatly. They felt that Zhuowen's strength seemed to have become stronger than before. Could it be an illusion? Puchi. The moment Shihuai and Gui were forced to retreat, Zhuon suddenly threw out two swords. The Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword shuttled out like lightning. In an instant, the two closest cultivators were forced to retreat. Zhuon took a step forward and arrived in front of the cultivator in the front. He threw out a punch. The moment the punch was thrown out, the aura in his body gradually woke up like a sleeping beast. Boom! The sound of an explosion was heard. Immediately, the cultivator was blasted into a mist of blood by Zhuowen's punch. At the same time, Zhuowen's empty left hand grabbed out in the air and grabbed onto the right arm of the cultivator on the left that intended to launch a surprise attack against him, and then he suddenly squeezed and actually tore off this person's left arm. Slaughtering Dao Finger. After killing one and injuring another, Zhuon made a gesture with both hands. Suddenly, the surrounding energy of the Way of Heaven gathered and finally formed a terrifyingly huge finger. He threw it behind him. The three cultivators who wanted to sneak up on him were immediately blasted into powder by the Slaughtering Dao Finger. The Slaughtering Dao Finger was definitely one of Zhuowen's trump cards. It was clearly said that this divine ability could kill the master of the Way of Heaven if it was cultivated to the peak. Now that Zhuowen's original body and doppelganger had combined, the Slaughtering Dao Finger was extremely terrifying. It was naturally easy to kill the master of the Way of Heaven. In just an instant, 4 people were killed and 1 was seriously injured. Everyone was shocked. Unfortunately, Zhuon did not give them time to be shocked. He took a step forward and completely displayed the power of the Pangu's sacred body. He rushed into the crowd like a tiger in a flock of sheep. Unexpectedly, not a single cultivator was able to block Zhuowen's attack. The strength of these cultivators was far inferior to that of Shihuai and Gui. Although they were also masters of the Way of Heaven, they were only at the early stage of the Way of Heaven. They were at the same level as the skinny man who had been seriously injured by Zhuon. In front of the Pangu's sacred body, they were no different from weaklings. The battle between more than 40 masters of the Way of Heaven and Zhuon, who was only at the two extremes of life and death, should have been a one-sided battle. However, in the end, they were crushed. The woman in the Cheongsam was dumbfounded. She looked at the scene in disbelief. She felt that what she was seeing now was the most absurd thing she had ever seen. More than 40 masters of the way of heaven were being slaughtered like weaklings in front of the two extremes of life and death. This was too terrifying and abnormal. As for Shi Huai and Gui Yi, they had already quietly retreated when Zhuowen had unleashed his full strength. They were trembling with fear. At this moment, Zhuowen was simply the most terrifying devil god. He was like a completely different person compared to the Zhuowen who had fought with them before. What's going on? Has this man been hiding his strength all this time? Why is he so terrifying? Shi Huai trembled and said in a daze. Chapter 2647. Defeat the enemy. Shi Huai's eyes were filled with hatred. As soon as Gui finished speaking, he flew out with the token in his hand, intending to fight Zhuowen to the death. Gui Yi followed closely behind. The Tao inscriptions on the surface of the long rod in his hand began to emit a dazzling light. Obviously, Gui Yi was also going all out. At this moment, nearly half of the 40-plus practitioners in the field had been killed by Zhuowen. The rest of the practitioners were terrified and no longer dared to attack Zhuowen. They retreated to the periphery of the battle and watched the scene in horror. Shi Huai and Gui Yi also rushed over at this moment. The aura on their bodies had swelled to the peak. It was as if two invisible angry dragons were wrapping around them, carrying a shocking might. Shi Huai and Gui Yi held their respective divine artifacts and turned into two swift streaks of light, breaking through the sky. The explosive sounds in the air made the listeners want to cover their ears and scream hysterically. Everyone was paying attention to the streamers that Shi Huai and Gui Yi had turned into. They could see that Gui Yi and Shi Huai were going all out. This attack was more terrifying than any of their previous attacks. It was enough to kill any heavenly Tao master in an instant. Even a Tao Yuan master would not be able to escape. Shi Huai and Gui Yi are burning their blood essence. They are going all out. Not far away, the woman in the Cheongsam frowned slightly. The combat strength of two peak heavenly Tao masters who were burning their blood essence was extremely terrifying. It was comparable to an ordinary Tao Yuan master. Even Steel Plume would not choose to face Shi Huai and Gui Yi's desperate attacks head-on. Thinking of this, the woman in the Cheongsam rolled her beautiful eyes and could not help but look at the white-clothed young man. She knew that the white-clothed young man would choose to retreat. After all, Shi Huai and Gui Yi's desperate attacks were very powerful. Not only the woman in the Cheongsam, but the others also had the same thought. They did not believe that Zhuowen would really dare to face this attack head-on. Of course, they also knew that once Zhuowen chose to retreat, he would face the continuous attacks of Shi Huai and Gui Yi. At that time, the advantage that Zhuowen originally had would disappear in this retreat. But soon, Zhuowen's next move shocked everyone. Zhuowen slowly turned around and looked indifferently at the two streamers that were rushing towards him. Then he stomped his feet on the ground, clenched his right hand into a fist, and punched out. This punch was simple, without any fancy moves. It didn't even have the aura of Renhe Taoist rhyme. This guy, he actually chose to fight head-on? Is he crazy? The Cheongsam woman's pupils shrank as she almost exclaimed out loud. She looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. An uproar broke out in the surroundings. When the two streamers and with their imposing auras, the two streamers don't. At the moment of the collision, it was as if the world was silent. Then, everyone was shocked to find that above the starry sky, a violent energy crazily erupted. That energy was like an erupting volcano, becoming gorgeous and colorful in the sky. As for the berserk energy, it swept out in an unparalleled manner. Like an invisible ripple, it quickly spread out. The 20 cultivators closest to it all let out a muffled groan, spat out a mouthful of blood, and retreated in a sorry state. Even the woman in the Cheongsam, who was a little far away, frowned slightly. The moment the aftershock spread, she had to retreat a distance under the protection of the Steel Plume. Bang! Bang! Two strange sounds resounded. Then, everyone was shocked to find that Shi Huai and Gui Yi were sent flying backwards in an extremely sorry state. And the divine artifacts in front of the two of them were actually shattered. In the opposite direction of the two flying backwards, the white-clothed young man stood in the air like a rock. His eyes were calm, like an ancient well without ripples. Shi and Gui, who were still struggling in the air, suddenly felt a chill in their chests. Then, their bodies fell down involuntarily. The two of them found that in front of their chests, there was a divine sword piercing through each of their chests. Thump. The two divine swords seemed to have the strength of 10,000 pounds, nailing the two of them to the ground. No matter how they struggled, they could not break free. The two divine swords were, of course, the Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword. Zhuowen's face was calm, but his heart was filled with excitement. Just now, when he chose to fight with Shi and Gui head-on, he silently mobilized the power of the Pangu sacred body. He wanted to see how powerful the Pangu sacred body was after it was promoted to 2 stars. In the end, what surprised Zhuowen was that the power of the Pangu sacred body was far beyond his expectations. Not only did it resist the desperate attacks of Shi and Gui, but it also shattered their divine artifacts. Zhuowen landed beside Shi and Gui. With a wave of his sleeve, he took off their spiritual rings. The remaining 20 practitioners who were besieging Zhuowen were too scared to move forward. More than 40 people had besieged him, and nearly half of them had been killed by this person. Furthermore, he had fought with his life on the line against Shi and Gui, shattering their divine weapons and defeating them. What kind of monstrous genius was this? If they still went against this person, they would be digging their own graves. Shi and Gui glared at each other, both shocked and angry. Do you know who the force behind us is? We are all from a Taoist force. Even in the Xianmi heavenly territory, it is a powerful force. How about this? We were wrong before. Now, let's remove the stone tablet immediately. Then, we will write off the grudge between us, Shi said coldly. Gui looked at Zhuowen coldly. He knew that since the white-clothed young man in front of him knew about the heavenly law origin crystal, he must know something about the Xianmi heavenly territory. He should know what a Taoist force represented. After knowing that they were from a Taoist force, they felt that the white-clothed young man in front of them should be afraid. After all, the white-clothed young man was indeed powerful, but he was only from the 8 heavens. How could he have any backing? If he killed them, he would completely offend the 2 Taoist forces, Pavali and Sky Crane House. Although the 2 of them were only inner disciples in Pavali and Sky Crane House, they were still the representatives of the 8 heavens. If they died in the 8 heavens, even Pavali and Sky Crane House would not let it go. Chapter 2648. Fire Plume. However, we can help you settle this. Shi said calmly. He could feel the hostility in Zhuowen's eyes, so he threw out such conditions, hoping that Zhuowen would know the severity of the situation. Unfortunately, as soon as Shi finished speaking, Yuan slammed his palm on his forehead. Shi eyes were wide open, and he died with remaining grievances. Gui looked at the dead Shi. His calm eyes were suddenly filled with panic and fear. This was the fear of death. He did not expect that the white-clothed young man in front of him would kill Shi without thinking about the consequences. Write it off? If it was before all of you made a move, I really wouldn't want to cause trouble. Unfortunately, all of you wanted to join forces to kill me and even turn my Wenshui palace into a mess. Do you think that just writing it off will be enough? Zhuowen sneered. I will compensate you. Please spare me, Gui said hurriedly. Just use your lives as compensation. Zhuowen's right index finger and middle finger formed a sword and pointed at Gui's forehead. A powerful spiritual sense storm instantly ground Gui's soul to nothingness. The moment Shi and Gui died, the surroundings were silent. It was so quiet that it was terrifying. Among them, the 20 cultivators who had besieged Zhuowen were trembling and fell into a deathly silence. Come here. Zhuowen pointed at the 20 cultivators, and a powerful killing intent firmly locked onto them. The 20 cultivators felt bitter in their hearts. They knew that under the lock of this killing intent, they simply couldn't escape unless they broke this killing intent. However, breaking this killing intent meant going against Zhuowen, and their end would most likely be the same as Shi and Gui. The 20 cultivators obediently came before Zhuowen. They lowered their heads and did not say a word. Swear an oath to the heavenly law and become my Zhuowen's slaves. Of course, I won't make you my slaves forever. You will be free after 100 years. Zhuowen said indifferently. He knew very well that these 20 people were all heavenly Tao masters. Cultivators who could prove their Tao were all geniuses, so it was inevitable that they would be proud and arrogant. If they were to become Zhuowen's permanent slaves, they would rather die than submit. Therefore, Zhuowen gave them a time limit, which was the same method he used to subdue Bloodscale. The 20 people looked at each other in dismay and hesitated. If you don't agree, then die. Zhuowen's gaze was sharp, and his killing intent surged out as if it was material. These 20 people naturally felt this terrifying killing intent, and their hearts trembled as they all swore the heavenly Tao oath. 100 years was too short for them. After swearing the heavenly oath, these 20 people all revealed bitter smiles. They came to the 8 heavens in high spirits, but they didn't expect to become someone else's slaves, and their master was actually someone from the 8 heavens. This made them feel even more humiliated, but between humiliation and life, they decisively chose the latter. Fortunately, they wouldn't be permanent servants. They would only be servants for 100 years, which made them feel relieved. After these 20 people swore the heavenly Tao oath, they all stood respectfully behind Zhuowen. Zhuowen didn't care about these 20 people anymore. The reason why he only made them slaves for 100 years was mainly to let these 20 people protect the Wind Snow Palace for 100 years. He could feel that there would be more and more cultivators coming from the Xianmi heavenly domain. He always felt that the purpose of these cultivators was not only the seal of the Eldritch heavenly domain, but also other purposes. In addition, Zhuowen still had to go to the space-time temple and Earth to find the origin of the mythological era. Mu Chenxue was in seclusion, so Zhuowen naturally couldn't leave the Wind Snow Palace without worry. These 20 people together were a considerable force. It should be more than enough to protect the Wind Snow Palace. You guys continue to use the stone tablet to test the Tao roots. If you find another Tao root and they are willing to follow you, you can take them away after 100 years. Zhuowen said to the 20 people behind him. When the 20 people heard this, they were all pleasantly surprised. Previously, with Shihui and Gui around, even if the Tao root was chosen, it would probably be taken away by the 2 of them first. As for the 20 people, they probably could only drink the leftovers, or maybe not even the leftovers. But now that Shihui and Gui were no longer around, the selection of the Tao root would naturally be a fair competition. This was a blessing in disguise for them. Hello, I'm Fire Plume from the Purple Red House. I'm also from the Xianmi heavenly domain. The woman in the Cheongsam, who was originally standing not far away and watching coldly, brought the steel giant to Zhuowen's side and spoke in a rather polite manner. Zhuowen glanced at the woman in the Cheongsam, and then his gaze fell on the steel giant behind her. The woman in the Cheongsam, Fire Plume, didn't have a strong aura. She was probably at the peak of the heavenly Tao master, the same level as Shihui and Gui. But the steel giant behind the woman in the Cheongsam was very different. Its aura was as vast and boundless as the ocean. Zhuowen knew that it was at least a Daoyuan master, or even a Hunyuan master. Of course, Zhuowen wasn't necessarily afraid of the steel giant. After all, his Pangus sacred body had advanced to the 2 stars realm. Ordinary Daoyuan masters were no match for the Pangus sacred body, and Hunyuan master might not be able to kill him. Zhuowen, the domain lord of the great Brahma domain. Zhuowen nodded slightly and said. Fire Plume smiled and didn't mind Zhuowen's impolite attitude. She still smiled and said, Domain Lord Zhuo, you have extraordinary talent and monstrous strength. Your future is limitless. If you can go to the Xianmi heavenly domain, you will definitely soar. Zhuowen nodded and said indifferently, What do you 2 want? If there is nothing else, I have other things to do. With what Shihui and Gui had done before, Zhuowen didn't have a good impression of these people from the Xianmi heavenly domain. The steel giant beside the woman in the Cheongsam did give him a sense of crisis, but Zhuowen wasn't afraid. If the steel giant attacked, it might not be able to stop Zhuowen. Moreover, Zhuowen also believed that the strength he had shown just now was enough to make the steel giant wary. It would certainly not attack rashly. Hoi Yu's brow furrowed slightly. She wasn't happy with Zhuo Wen's attitude, but it was clear that she was a shrewd person. It's like this, Domain Lord Zhuo. If you bring your junior sister with you to Xianmi Heavenly Domain, our Purple Red House will welcome you with open arms. Chapter 2649. Refused. Zhuo Wen only nodded. He didn't really care about Fire Plume's words. No matter how good Fire Plume's self-restraint was, she was still a bit angry at Zhuo Wen's indifferent attitude. She said coldly, Domain Lord Zhuo, if I'm not here, you will most likely die in the Heavenly Moat. I think that if you really want to go to the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, you should reconsider. Zhuo Wen looked coldly at Fire Plume and asked, I know that the Heavenly Moat is very dangerous. Since you can cross it to the 8 Heavenly Domains, I can naturally cross it to enter the Xianmi Heavenly Domain. Do I have to rely on you to enter the Xianmi Heavenly Domain? Fire Plume sneered. The Heavenly Moat is a true land of despair. If you don't have a flying ship specially designed for the Heavenly Moat, you are simply courting death. Someone like you doesn't know anything about the Heavenly Moat. I can guarantee that you will definitely die in the Heavenly Moat. Zhuo Wen frowned. He could tell from Fire Plume's words that there were certain conditions to cross the Heavenly Moat. Zhuo Wen turned his head and asked seriously, can't ordinary flying divine tools do the trick? Just as Fire Plume said, he really didn't know anything about the Heavenly Moat. He saw that there were so many people in the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, and most of them were Heavenly Dao Lords. He thought that the Heavenly Moat wouldn't be too dangerous for him. But now, it seemed that he had underestimated the Heavenly Moat. If you really choose an ordinary flying divine tool, then you are dead. Not long after entering the Heavenly Moat, the flying divine tool will completely collapse. Without it, there is a chance that second-step Dao confirming experts will die in the Heavenly Moat. Fire Plume sneered. Zhuo Wen frowned and said, Please enlighten me, Miss Fire Plume. Fire Plume shook his head and said, You and I are not related. I have no obligation to tell you these things unless you and the girl beside you join Purple Red House. Then I will take you to Xianmi Heavenly Region. Zhuo Wen shook his head. I won't join your Purple Red House. If you don't say it, I'm sure they already know. As he said that, Zhuo Wen pointed to the 20 cultivators behind him. These 20 people were also from the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, so they definitely knew the method to enter and exit the Heavenly Chasm. Fire Plume's lips curled into a sly smile as he said, They're just from a small force. They came here with the help of Shi Huai and Gui Yi's spaceships. Don't think that you can use their spaceships just because you've obtained their spirit rings, because the control of the spaceships is controlled by the forces behind them. Once they discover that the representatives they sent have died, the corresponding spaceships will automatically be scrapped. If you don't believe me, you can try the spaceships in Shi Huai and Gui Yi's spirit rings. Zhuo Wen was stunned. Seeing that Fire Plume didn't seem to be lying to him, he took out Shi Huai and Gui Yi's spirit rings and scanned them with his divine sense. He found a lot of Heavenly Dao origin crystals inside. Unfortunately, they were all low-grade Heavenly Dao origin crystals. In addition, there were some divine herbs, but these divine herbs all contained Dao rhymes. Zhuo Wen suspected that these divine herbs were Heavenly Dao origin divine herbs, materials used to refine Heavenly Dao origin divine pills. Because Zhuo Wen had inherited the alchemy Dao insights of the Emperor Pillfire, he was no stranger to many Dao origin divine herbs. He was familiar with the Heavenly Dao origin divine herbs in Shi Huai and Gui Yi's spirit rings. Zhuo Wen knew that with these Heavenly Dao origin divine herbs, he could use them to practice and raise his alchemy level to Heavenly Dao origin divine pills. In addition, he did find 2 spaceships in Shi Huai and Gui Yi's spirit rings. These 2 spaceships were different from ordinary flight divine artifacts. He could feel a powerful thrust from these spaceships, especially when he got closer to the spaceships. This thrust became more and more obvious, as if it was trying to push him out. Taking out the 2 spaceships, Zhuo Wen's eyes were filled with surprise and doubt. That's an anti-gravity seal. Let me tell you, the biggest threat to nature's moat is the terrifying gravity that comes from its depths. The gravity is so strong that it's unimaginable. Any light that shines into nature's moat will be involuntarily sucked in by this gravity. This is also the main reason why nature's moat always looks so dark. Ordinary spaceships don't have anti-gravity seals. This means that after entering the natural chasm, it's very easy to be attracted by the terrifying gravity and fall into the endless depths of the natural chasm. You should understand now, right? Fire Plume pointed at the two spaceships that Juan took out and said faintly. Juan's eyes were solemn. If the natural chasm was really as terrifying as Fire Plume said, then wouldn't Crepe Myrtle's star be in trouble? Like him, Crepe Myrtle's star didn't know much about the natural chasm. If he used an ordinary spaceship to enter the natural chasm, he would be courting death. Thinking of this, Juan sighed in his heart. He could only pray that Crepe Myrtle's star would be lucky. Moreover, he had also tested the two airships just now. It was just as Huoyu had said. No matter how he tried to stimulate the two airships with his spiritual sense, the two airships didn't react at all. There wasn't even a trace of Dao charm on the surface. However, the anti-gravity seal on the surface of the two spaceships was still there. What a complicated pattern! Juan looked at the anti-gravity seal pattern on the surface of the spaceships and couldn't help but sigh. The anti-gravity seal is extremely complicated. It requires at least a heavenly fate realm formation Dao master to be able to set it up, Fire Plume said faintly. Juan's eyes flickered as he calmly put the two spaceships into his spirit ring. Although the two spaceships were scrapped, the anti-gravity seal on them was very valuable for research. If he was asked to set up the anti-gravity seal out of thin air, it would be impossible for him to do it. However, Juan felt that he might be able to do it if he followed the pattern of the anti-gravity restriction and copied it. Although he was only a level 9 formation Dao master, his divine sense was getting stronger with the help of the Panga banner. Even a heavenly fate realm formation Dao master didn't have a divine sense as strong as Juan's. If he used his divine sense to forcibly restore the anti-gravity seal, Juan believed that he could do it. However, he might suffer a lot of backlash. After all, if a formation Dao master forcibly set up a formation Dao master that was beyond their level, it would cause a lot of damage to their divine sense. However, Juan's divine sense was extremely strong, so he didn't have to worry about this. Therefore, if you want to go to the Xianmi heavenly domain, it's best for you to choose us. Otherwise, the chances of you dying in the heavenly moat are too high. I think you are a smart person. Fire Plume was still talking, but unfortunately, she was interrupted by Juan. Are you done? If there's nothing else, please leave. Fire Plume was stunned. Looking at the calm white-clothed youth in front of her, she couldn't help but get angry. What did this guy take her kindness for? He was too hateful. However, before Fire Plume could do anything, she was suppressed by the steel giant. We're fine. We'll take our leave first. The steel giant looked at Juan indifferently and left the Wind Snow Palace with Fire Plume. Steel Plume, what are you doing? Are you afraid of that kid? After leaving the Wind Snow Palace, Fire Plume broke free from the steel giant and said angrily, "We don't have any conflict with this person. There's no need to get into a conflict with him. Moreover, miss, don't you find it strange? Since this person is from the 8 heavenly domains, why is he so powerful and terrifying? And why does he know about the Heavenly Path origin crystal?" Steel Plume said indifferently. Chapter 2650. Processing. Steel Plume, what do you mean? Fire Plume thought of something and asked. The energy in the starry sky of the 8 heavens is so poor. It's already not easy to cultivate to the virtual sky world. I've checked this boy. His real age is definitely not more than 500 years old. He's so young, but he already has the cultivation of the 2 extremes of life and death. He also has the strength to kill the Heavenly Dao Master and 3 Heavenly Dao Divine Tools. Steel Plume paused and looked at Fire Plume. He knew that Fire Plume already knew what he meant. This boy has a big secret. Maybe he has something to do with the origin of the mythological era. Fire Plume narrowed his eyes and said with some horror, "They didn't come to the 8 heavens mainly for the gap in the primitive heavenly realm. Although the gap in the primitive heavenly realm was big, it wasn't enough for Xianmi heavenly realm to send so many strong cultivators. They were only a small part of it. In the following days, more cultivators would come from Xianmi Heavenly Realm. Their main purpose was to come here because of the information provided by Shuewen. The origin of the mythological era was hidden in the 8 heavens. Although they didn't know what was in the origin, they were sure that the things in the origin would definitely not be bad. It was enough to make many cultivators go crazy. In the mythological era, it was a real gathering of gods and powerful cultivators. It was an era where heroes rose together and geniuses filled the sky. In the mythological era, there were countless legends of powerful cultivators. The 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, Xingtian Zhantian, Quafu chasing the sun, Ho Yi shooting the 9 suns, and so on. These powerful cultivators were real, but they were later annihilated in the long river of time. They either died, lived in seclusion, or disappeared without a trace. Until the end of the mythological era, when the primitive heavenly realm and Xianmi heavenly realm entered the era of the human race and the witch race, which was the era Zhuowen lived in. In fact, there was a gap in civilization between the mythological era and the Xianmi heavenly realm. Whether it was the primitive heavenly realm or Xianmi heavenly realm, there was no record of what happened after the mythological era ended. It could be said that the end of the mythological era came suddenly. Many powerful beings seemed to have disappeared at that moment, no longer appearing in front of everyone's eyes. Although the end of the mythological era was inexplicable, many cultivators knew that the things left behind from the mythological era were absolutely priceless treasures. They were treasures that made many cultivators go crazy. Since the origin of the mythological era was in one of the 8 heavens, and the 8 heavens had produced such an abnormal Zhuowen, Fire Plume and Steel Plume could not help but suspect that this person had something to do with the origin of Lustreless. There's a high chance that this person is related to the land of origin, but he's very strong. If we fight him head-on, we won't be able to get away with it, Fire Plume said worriedly. After witnessing Zhuowen not only survive the joint attacks of over 40 heavenly Tao masters, but he'd even turned the tables and killed 20 of them. Moreover, he'd even killed Shi Huai and Gui Yi who'd led the attack. The Fire Plume was extremely fearful of Zhuowen and didn't want to enter into conflict with him. We don't have to enter into a conflict with this person. We just have to follow him. Didn't the sect master give you a concealment talisman? That's a heavenly fate talisman. As long as we use that talisman, even the heavenly fate master might not be able to detect us, let alone this person, Steel Plume said. Fire Plume took out 2 talismans from his spirit ring and gave one to Steel Plume. Strangely, when the 2 of them put the talismans on their bodies, they actually merged with the surrounding starry sky. Even their auras were exactly the same as the starry sky. If a cultivator used his divine sense to scan the starry sky where the 2 of them were, he wouldn't think that the 2 of them were actually there. Instead, he'd think that it was just a starry sky. The 2 of them who used the talismans silently hid on an uninhabited meteorite tens of thousands of miles away from the Wen Snow Palace. Within the Wen Snow Palace, after Zhuowen instructed those 20 people to continue testing the stone steels, he instructed them to protect the Wen Snow Palace while he was away. The 20 of them naturally didn't dare to refuse. After all, they were now Zhuo Wen's servants. Although it was only for 100 years, if Zhuo Wen wanted them dead, he could do so with a single thought. They would definitely not dare disobey Zhuo Wen's orders. After he finished instructing them, Nguyen gazed seriously at Tong Chimei who stood by his side and said, "Chimei, since you possess an earth-rank ancestral Tao root, then going to the Xianmi heavenly region is actually the best choice. Why didn't you agree just now?" Tong Chimei said seriously as well, "I don't know anything about the Xianmi heavenly region. No matter if it was Shi Huai, Gui Yi, or Fire Plume, they didn't respect my choice when they recruited me. So, I didn't make a choice at that time." Zhuowen nodded. In terms of choice, he agreed with Tong Chimei. With Tong Chimei's natural talent, it would be extremely easy for her to join a Dao Palace level power in the Xianmi heavenly region. No matter if it was Shi Huai or Gui Yi, the powers standing behind them were only Dao sects, so they naturally had to respect a genius like Tong Chimei. Unfortunately, Shi Huai and Gui Yi were both cultivators of the Xianmi heavenly domain and did not have much respect for Tong Chimei. This also caused Tong Chimei to have a bad impression of Shi Huai and Gui Yi's invitation. After all, Tong Chimei was practically an amateur when it came to the matters of the Xianmi heavenly region, and all the cultivators from the Xianmi heavenly region were definitely lofty experts in her heart. So long as Shi Huai and Gui Yi were sufficiently respectful to Tong Chimei and didn't fight over her and treat her like an item, then perhaps Tong Chimei would really be tempted. I'm going out for a period of time. These 20 people will stay in the Wind Snow Palace to protect all of you. The next period of time won't be too peaceful, so all of you should pay attention. If Qin Shui comes out of her closed-door cultivation, then all of you should tell her about it. After Zhuan instructed Magatama and Yuezu, he went to inform Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse. These two fellows relied on his identity as Zhuan to occupy the best place in the Wind Snow Palace, even showing off their strength. When Zhuan found the two of them, he found that the two of them were acting like masters, ordering the servants of the Wind Snow Palace around, completely ignoring the fact that they were living under someone else's roof. Yo, little brat, you've finally come out of your closed-door cultivation. The green-haired mummy was sitting cross-legged, enjoying the service of a frightened servant. When he saw Zhuan come in, he said slowly. Bloodscale quickly stood up and respectfully smiled at Zhuan. Just now Zhuan had caused such a large commotion in the quest hall, so Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse had naturally seen it. Chapter 2651. Huaxia Continent. After all, Shui Lin had used the high-grade Heaven's Path origin crystal that Zhuowen had given him. Although he had recovered to the Heaven's Path Master realm and was much stronger than ordinary Heaven's Path Masters, Shui Lin was still a Heaven's Path Master. However, Bloodscale was besieged by more than 40 Heavenly Path Masters, 2 of whom were peak Heavenly Path Masters. Bloodscale naturally could not defeat them. At most, he would not be defeated. However, Zhuan easily defeated the besiegement of more than 40 Heavenly Path Masters. This made Bloodscale realize that Zhuan's strength had increased greatly after coming out of seclusion. Zhuan also felt that Bloodscale's attitude towards him had changed significantly. However, he did not care. Instead, he looked at the green-haired mummy and said, "Since I've come out of seclusion, shouldn't we go?" The green-haired mummy nodded and said, "Since you know the planet of origin, that's great. You lead the way." Zhuan took out the space-time roulette and left the Wind Snow Palace with the green-haired mummy and Bloodscale. Not long after Zhuan left the Wind Snow Palace, Fire Plume and Steel Plume also took out their flying divine artifacts and followed quietly behind him on a remote meteorite not far from the Wind Snow Palace. The two of them used concealment talismans, and their auras were completely integrated with the starry sky. Even though Zhuowen's divine sense was very powerful, he did not notice that the two of them were secretly following him. However, the green-haired mummy, who was sitting cross-legged on the deck, glanced behind him and sneered. However, the green-haired mummy did not say anything. Instead, it sat cross-legged and closed its eyes, silently absorbing the starry sky energy around it. This time, Zhuan was controlling it himself. Its speed was much faster than usual, almost as fast as lightning. However, Zhuan was still somewhat dissatisfied with the space-time roulette's fastest speed. If only I could get the complete space-time roulette. Zhuan muttered to himself. The space-time roulette that he had obtained was not complete. Instead, it had been refined using the core components of the space-time roulette. There was a huge difference between it and the real space-time roulette. If it was a complete space-time roulette, Zhuan believed that the speed would definitely be much faster than it was now. The space-time law inside would also be more complete. Speaking of which, the space-time roulette belonged to the space-time master. Zhuan wondered if the space-time temple had any other flying artifacts similar to the space-time roulette. If there was, it would definitely be good news for Zhuan. Zhuan planned to use the space-time key to enter the space-time temple after dealing with the origin lands on Earth. A month later, Zhuan looked at the blue planet in the distance and said, "I think the origin of the mythological era is this planet. It's called Earth, and it's also my hometown." The green-haired mummy narrowed its eyes and looked at Earth in the distance. Its gaze became cautious as it said, "You're right. I do feel an ancient aura on this planet. The age of this aura is definitely far beyond what you and I can imagine. Maybe this planet really is hiding the origin of the mythological era. With that, the green-haired mummy looked at Juan seriously and said, "Is this planet really your hometown? And why are you so sure that this planet is the origin of the mythological era?" "Because on this planet, there are also myths about Pango opening the sky, Kwafu chasing the sun, Ho-E shooting the sun, and so on. Although these myths are different from the legends of the mythological era in this starry sky, the difference is not big. That's why I have such a guess," Juan said. "No wonder. So that's how it is. No wonder the Pango flag chose you. Maybe it has something to do with this planet." The green-haired mummy whispered as it looked at Juan from head to toe, as if it was trying to get to know Juan all over again. "This planet is still managed by the cultivators." As they approached Earth, the green-haired mummy looked indifferently at an invisible continent hidden around Earth and said casually, "Yes, that's the Huaxia continent, a companion of Earth. Everyone in the Huaxia continent is a cultivator, while Earth is inhabited by mortals. How do you plan to find the land of origin?" Juan looked at the green-haired mummy and asked, "This jade pillar is the key to opening the land of origin. This planet may look ordinary on the surface, but I can see that there's some kind of formation hidden within this planet. This formation is naturally formed, and its level is very high. Even if it's me, I might die if I casually touch this formation. However, with this key, I think we should be able to unlock the formation," said the green-haired corpse. "What's your purpose in entering the land of origin?" Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he suddenly asked. The green-haired mummy said indifferently, "My purpose is to recover my strength. There are many things I need in the land of origin, and there are also many good things. Don't worry, you have the Pango flag, so I won't attack you. We're just going to take what we need in the land of origin." Zhuan nodded and said nothing. Ever since he obtained the Pango flag, the green-haired mummy had no hostility toward him. Instead, it was full of fear. He knew that the Pango flag must be very restrained against the green-haired mummy and would not attack him easily. Zhuowen looked at the streaks of sword light and realized that they were all cultivators flying on their swords. He did not feel surprised. When he first came to Earth with Tai Ching, he was also blocked by these cultivators flying on swords. He remembered that these sword cultivators were from Mount Buzhou, which should be the largest force in the Huaxia continent. Zhuan also had some recollection of the sect master of Mount Buzhou. His name should be Yuzhe. A bunch of trash. "Master, do you want me to help you destroy them?" Bloodscale looked at the group of sword cultivators blocking their way with disdain. These sword cultivators were all only in the celestial realm. Even the white-haired old man at the front of the group was only in the true immortal realm. Such a cultivation was indeed no different from an ant in the eyes of Zhuo Wen and the others. The white-haired old man at the front of the group was Yuzhe, the sect master of Mount Buzhou. He sensed an unfamiliar force approaching Earth and immediately gathered the elites of Mount Buzhou to rush out of the continent to check it out. However, Yuzhe's heart sank when he found that he could not see through the aura of the three people on the space-time roulette in front of him and that they gave him an extremely strong sense of oppression. Yuzhe also found that the young man in white standing at the front of the space-time roulette gave him a sense of déjà vu, as if he had seen him somewhere before. Zhuan glanced at Bloodscale indifferently. The latter smiled awkwardly and did not dare to interrupt anymore. Zhuan walked out of the space-time roulette and cupped his hands at Yuzhe. "Sect Master Yu, long time no see. How have you been?" Chapter 2652. Sis returning to Earth. "Little brother Zhuowen?" Yuzhe asked tentatively. Zhuowen smiled and said, "Sect Master Yu has good eyesight. Back then, Tai Ching brought me here to settle some of the grudges from my previous life. I still have to thank Sect Master Yu. Little brother Zhuo's talent is indeed outstanding. It's only been a few hundred years, but I can't even compare to you anymore. Domain Lord Tai Ching really has good eyes." Yuzhe's face was full of emotion. He remembered that a few hundred years ago, Zhuan was only in the heaven god realm. Now, he actually couldn't see through this child's cultivation. He knew that Zhuan had probably advanced to the virtual sky world. Of course, If Yuzhe knew that Zhuan was now in the life and death realm and had even killed the heavenly Tao master, he would probably be so shocked that his teeth would fall out. Zhuan smiled and didn't explain that he had nothing to do with Tai Ching now. Logically speaking, Zhuowen's story should have spread far and wide in the Huaxia heaven region. Yuzhe probably didn't know about it because Earth was too remote and Yuzhe was too weak, so he didn't know about it. May I know why little brother Zhuo came here this time? Yuzhe asked politely. Zhuan said, Sect Master Yu, we might have to borrow Earth this time. We have some things to do. Yuzhe frowned and hesitated for a moment. Little brother Zhuo, you know that there's a difference between mortals and immortals. If you enter Earth, you might be devoured by Earth's laws of heaven and Earth. I'm afraid it's not appropriate. As soon as Yuzhe finished speaking, Shui Lin coldly harumphed, and an invisible sound wave spread out. Yuzhe's expression changed slightly, and he grunted as he retreated. The row of sword cultivators behind Yuzhe was even worse off. They staggered from side to side, their eyes filled with fear as they looked at Shui Lin in disbelief. It was just a cold snort, yet it was already so powerful. Just how powerful was this person? Moreover, the blood-red clothed man was standing behind Zhuowen and seemed to be following Zhuowen's lead. Didn't that mean that Zhuowen was even more terrifying than the blood-red clothed man? What can the laws of heaven and earth of a mere planet do to us? I say, you'd better keep your mouth shut. Letting us in is the best choice, otherwise. Before Bloodscale could finish speaking, he saw Zhuowen turn around and look at him coldly. Bloodscale couldn't say anything else. He hurriedly said, Master, I'm just anxious. Don't do it again. Zhuowen said calmly. Bloodscale nodded submissively. His imposing manner disappeared without a trace, and he followed behind Zhuowen like an obedient little lamb. The more Bloodscale behaved like this, the more Yuzhe feared and feared Zhuowen. The imposing manner released by Bloodscale just now was definitely not an ordinary virtual sky world. Even in the virtual sky world, he was still an expert among experts. However, such a powerful existence was actually so tame in front of Zhuowen. Yuzhe really didn't know how strong Zhuowen was. Little brother Zhuo, to be honest, the laws of heaven and earth of our earth are very strange. Generally speaking, after a cultivator enters the true immortal realm, the backlash and suppression from an ordinary planet can be completely offset by the cultivator's cultivation level. However, the laws of heaven and earth are very different. The stronger the cultivator, the stronger the suppression. Even virtual sky world cultivators would be seriously injured by the terrifying backlash after entering Earth. In the end, they wouldn't dare to stay on Earth for long. This old man isn't lying to you at all, Yuzhe hurriedly explained. Zhuowen's gaze sharpened. If what Yuzhe said was true, then Earth was indeed different from ordinary planets. At that time, he only sent a clone to Earth, so he didn't feel the backlash from the powerful laws of heaven and earth. At that time, he also didn't care too much about it. Now that he knew Earth was not ordinary, he naturally thought a lot more than before. Sect Master Yu, we didn't come here to cause trouble. We really have important things to deal with. Even if you say so, we still plan to enter Earth and give it a try. But rest assured, Sect Master Yu, we won't take the initiative to cause trouble. Zhuowen cupped his fists and said sincerely to Yuzhe. Yuzhe glanced at Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse behind Zhuowen and felt bitter in his heart. He knew that even if he refused, he probably wouldn't be able to stop them. After all, Zhuowen and the other two were too strong. If he refused, he would definitely offend Zhuowen. If he agreed, he would instead buy a favor from them. Sect Master Yu, this is a small token of appreciation. Please don't refuse. Seeing Yuzhe hesitate, Zhuowen took out a jade bottle and handed it to Yuzhe. Yuzhe frowned and opened the bottle. His pupils suddenly shrank because he found that the jade bottle was actually filled with Void Sky pills. Moreover, there were 10 of them. Void Sky pills were high-grade medicinal pills that could help peak-stage True God cultivators form their Void Sky bridge and advance to the virtual sky world. Yuzhe had been stuck at peak-stage True God for a long time. As long as he had these Void Sky pills, he would definitely advance to the virtual sky world. It could be said that Zhuowen's Void Sky pills were a temptation he couldn't refuse. Putting away the jade bottle, Yuzhe nodded and said, "Little brother Zhua, as long as you don't cause trouble on Earth, you can enter." "Thank you, Sect Master Yu." Zhuan cupped his fists with a smile and immediately put away the space-time roulette. He took Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse and rushed into Earth. Watching Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse leave, Yuzhe sighed softly. At the same time, there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. After obtaining these Void Sky pills, he planned to go into closed-door meditation to break through to the virtual sky world after returning. "Sect Master, are we just going to let them in?" A middle-aged man came to Yuzhe's side and asked somewhat unwillingly. Yuzhe shook his head and said, "Even if we stop them, what's the point? With their strength, killing us would be as easy as squashing ants. What's the point of us stopping them? When the time comes, we'll only sacrifice ourselves for nothing. It's better to buy a favor from them." The middle-aged man fell silent. Yuzhe was right. Wen and the others were too powerful. Shui Lin had only snorted coldly, and they had already lost their footing. If they were to fight, they wouldn't even be able to touch a finger of Shui Lin. After Yuzhe and the others returned to the Huaxia continent, two figures slowly approached tens of thousands of miles away from Earth. These two figures almost merged with the starry sky. It was impossible to tell which was the figure and which was the starry sky. "Miss, they've entered that planet. Could it be that it's not an ordinary planet?" Steel Plume secretly said. Fire Plume, who was wearing a cheongsam, frowned slightly as she stared at the blue planet in the distance and said, "No matter how I look at it, this planet looks ordinary. Why would they enter an ordinary planet with life? Let's go in and take a look." Steel Plume said. Fire Plume pondered for a moment and nodded. The two of them quietly entered Earth. Chapter 2653. Kunlun Jade Pillar. The moment Zhuan and the others entered Earth, their expressions changed. Zhuan could clearly feel that there was a powerful force on the surface of Earth's atmosphere that was squeezing his body, as if it was trying to push him away and prevent him from getting close. Under this pressure, Zhuan's blood began to boil involuntarily. It was as if the blood in his body would burst out if he did not control it well. Not only Zhuan, but Bloodscale and the green-haired mummy also sensed the abnormality. Their expressions did not look good as they tried their best to resist this terrifying pressure. Moreover, Yun realized that the green-haired mummy, who was the strongest among them, was in the most difficult situation. Zhuan guessed that this pressure would become stronger as one's strength increased. Thinking of this, Zhuan revealed a look of understanding. He hurriedly retracted his aura and hid it within his body, suppressing his strength to below the heavenly god level. Then, Zhuan was pleasantly surprised to find that the pressure around him had weakened a lot. "My guess was right," Zhuan muttered softly. Then he told Bloodscale and the green-haired mummy the method. The two of them followed Zhuan's instructions and found that the pressure around them had indeed weakened a lot. Isn't this planet too strange? Why is the law of heaven and earth so powerful? After suppressing his strength, Shui Lin muttered to himself in fear. The green-haired mummy's eyes shone brightly. He knew that the more extraordinary this planet was, the more likely it was that the land of origin was hidden on this planet. "Green Hat, is the land of origin that you mentioned hidden on this planet?" Zhuan looked at the green-haired mummy and asked. The green-haired mummy's eyes flickered as he took out the jade pillar he had obtained from the Su shrine. The complicated patterns on the surface of the jade pillar were even clearer now, emitting a white light in the void. That's right. Only the land of origin can cause such a reaction from the jade pillar. It's just that after so many years of evolution, so much has changed. The green-haired mummy frowned slightly. Although they knew that the land of origin was on this planet, they didn't know the specific location. If they wanted to find the entrance to the land of origin, it would be quite troublesome. In the blink of an eye, the jade pillar in the green-haired corpse's hand trembled slightly, and the mysterious patterns on its surface fell off, connecting into a complicated pattern line that swept toward the bottom of the atmosphere. These lines were extremely fine, invisible to the naked eye of mortals. Ordinary cultivators would also have a hard time detecting them. It was also because Zhuan's divine soul was strong enough that he was able to use his divine sense to capture this line. Apparently, Bloody Scale and the green-haired mummy had noticed the pattern as well. The three of them looked at each other and tacitly followed the pattern. The pattern line passed through the atmosphere, the blue sea, and entered the continent. After passing through several large continents, it entered the easternmost part of the continent. Zhuan looked at the place where the pattern line passed through and narrowed his eyes. Wasn't this the country where he was from in his previous life, Huaxia? Speaking of which, the legend of Pangu splitting open the sky was indeed a legend in Huaxia. In other words, the entrance to the land of origin should be within Huaxia's territory. The Dongjiang province was the most developed province in the eastern coastal area of Huaxia. It had a developed economy and a large population. Among them, Jinling City was the largest city in the Dongjiang province. It was one of the largest cities in the entire country. At this moment, many people were gathered on the top floor of a towering building in Jinling City. These men and women were dressed in gorgeous clothes and spoke elegantly. They were obviously the upper class of Jinling City. The top floor was an open-air platform with complete facilities. There was even a swimming pool on the top floor. From the swimming pool, one could overlook the entire Jinling City. However, these upper-class people were all gathered under a glass ceiling. In front of them was an old man standing straight on the stage. On the stage, there was a rod-shaped object covered by a red cloth. The attention of the men and women below was attracted by the rod-shaped object covered by the red cloth. The old man's eyes were solemn. He slowly walked to the rod-shaped object and lifted the red cloth. Immediately, a somewhat dazzling jade-colored light flickered. Immediately, it gradually disappeared, revealing a jade pillar. The surface of the jade pillar was crisscrossed with extremely complicated patterns. It also revealed an ancient and vicissitude aura. This jade pillar was obviously an extraordinary object, especially the flickering jade light just now. The moment it shone on the crowd, they only felt warm and full of energy. Is this the Kunlun jade pillar? I've heard of the legend of this Kunlun jade pillar. I thought it was just a baseless rumor, but now that I've seen it, it's actually true. This Kunlun jade pillar is too miraculous. When the jade-colored light shone on my body, I realized that my pneumonia was much better. It really has the miraculous effect of curing all kinds of diseases. The crowd below discussed animatedly and looked at the jade pillar displayed on the stage with more fervent and fanatical gazes. The old man coughed dryly and pointed to the jade pillar. Seeing this jade pillar, everyone knows that this jade pillar is the Kunlun jade pillar. A year ago, there was a sudden change in Mount Kunlun. More than 10 rays of light swept out, and according to the description of the investigators, these rays of light were the Kunlun jade pillar. The Kunlun jade pillar has been obtained by many people. Those who have obtained the Kunlun jade pillar have all recovered from all sorts of illnesses. Even old people in their 70s are full of vigor after being nourished by the Kunlun jade pillar. Everyone should know about the effects of the Kunlun jade pillar from the rumors. This is one of the Kunlun jade pillars. The old chairman of the Realm Knight Group accidentally found it in an antique market. It was later confirmed to be the Kunlun jade pillar that has been rumored recently. After the old man finished speaking, his following words became much softer. They had heard of the Realm Knight Group for a long time. It was the largest group in Jinling City. It was said to have a deep background and had an unusual relationship with the General Secretary of the Dongjiang province. Even the mayor of Jinling City was polite to the old chairman of the Realm Knight Group. It was obvious that the old chairman of the Realm Knight Group was not simple. I wonder why old Chairman Chen took out the Kunlun jade pillar and summoned us? An enchanting woman below the stage asked in surprise. The old man said faintly, "Everyone here is a high-ranking person in Jinling City. Old Chen intends to rent the Kunlun jade pillar to all of you so that you can use it in turns for 3 days." As soon as he said that, an uproar broke out. Although it was only for 3 days, the Kunlun jade pillar's effects were extremely heaven-defying. Even 3 days was enough to expel all the diseases in their bodies. It could even strengthen their bodies and make them energetic. Chapter 2654. The origin of the jade pillar. As for snatching the Kunlun jade pillar, they had never thought about it. The Realm Knight Group was the largest group in Jinling City, and it controlled the underground forces of Jinling City. It was a behemoth that mingled with both the underworld and the underworld. In addition, Elder Chen had the support of the Dong Province's General Secretary. He could cover the sky with one hand in Jinling City. Who would dare to snatch the Kunlun Jade Pillar from such a terrifying person? If anyone dared to do such a thing, they would not live to see the next day. After all, the Realm Knight Group was too powerful, and it was almost a monopoly. Elder Chen is willing to rent the Kunlun Jade Pillar to us. It shouldn't be without reason, right? A man with big framed glasses asked calmly. The old man smiled and said, "Of course." In fact, the Realm Knight Group plans to take over the huge wasteland in the north of Jinling City and build a business circle that belongs to the Realm Knight Group. However, the mayor of Jinling City has been obstructing them, so Elder Chen needs your help. Everyone's expression changed slightly. They all knew about the wasteland in the north of Jinling City. It was said that it was a big project approved by the country, but it became a wasteland because of some delay. The wasteland was very large, at least hundreds of thousands of square meters. Because it was approved by the country, it was technically the country's. Without the country's permission, no one dared to touch it. The Realm Knight Group was bold enough to have ideas about the wasteland. However, many people knew the inside story. They knew that the wasteland had been abandoned by the country, but the mayor of Jinling City was more old-fashioned. Without the approval of the higher-ups, the mayor would not give the wasteland to developers. Everyone, I think it's obvious that a wasteland is better than the Kunlun Jade Pillar. If you don't agree, then pretend I didn't say anything, the old man said calmly. The originally quiet underground began to clamor. In the end, they all agreed to help when fighting for the wasteland. The old man revealed a satisfied expression when he saw that everyone had agreed. Soon after, just as he was about to pick up the Jade Pillar, he actually grabbed empty air. The old man's pupils shrank. He quickly looked over and found that not far to his left, a young man in white had appeared without him noticing. Moreover, the young man in white was wearing an ancient white robe. He held the Kunlun Jade Pillar in his hand and was constantly studying it. His face was full of surprise. There are actually jade pillars on Earth? But why is this jade pillar so much thinner than the one in Green Hat's hand? It seems to be only a tenth of the size of that jade pillar. The white-clothed young man muttered to himself as he casually threw the jade pillar into his spirit ring. Seeing the Kunlun Jade Pillar disappear before their eyes, the old man and everyone below were shocked. Where's the Kunlun Jade Pillar? The old man was the first to react. He secretly pressed a button hidden in his pocket. Then, from the secret door behind him, more than 10 burly men in black suits rushed out. The bodyguards took out their pistols one after another and pointed their pitch-black muzzles at the young man in white. The white-clothed youth was none other than Jun. He had arrived here by following the lines. The green-furred mummy and blood scale were standing behind Jun. However, the two of them had already used a concealment technique to conceal themselves. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to see them. Kunlun Jade Pillar? You named this thing the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Could it be that this thing has something to do with Kunlun Mountain? Zhuan's expression was calm. He turned a blind eye to the pistols in the hands of the bodyguards. Fire! The old man regained his composure. He didn't want to talk nonsense with Zhuan and immediately gave the order. Rather dense gunshots rang out. The people below had already retreated far away. They looked over in horror. They didn't expect the old man to be so decisive and shoot immediately. This was going to kill someone. But then, an incredible scene appeared before their eyes. They saw the white-clothed young man standing in the same place, letting the bullets hit his body. His expression didn't change at all. What shocked them even more was that these bullets were blocked when they fell within a foot of the white-clothed young man. They saw that there seemed to be an invisible barrier around the white-clothed young man. When the bullets fell on the invisible barrier, dense ripples and fluctuations splashed out. Under the white-clothed young man's feet, many bullets were scattered on the ground. These were all bullets that were blocked by the invisible barrier. How is this possible? Is he still human? He can't be killed by the pistols. Everyone was trembling in fear. Compared to the old man's order to shoot, They were now even more afraid. Think about it, a person who couldn't even be killed by a pistol was simply a monster. It was something that couldn't be explained by common sense. This was what scared them the most. The old man was also shocked. The dozen or so bodyguards standing behind the old man were also dumbfounded. Only after they had emptied the bullets in their pistols did they realize that the white-clothed youth was still standing in the same place, completely unharmed. What are you? The old man took a few steps back. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead as he said in disbelief. Juan impatiently waved his hand. The old man's body involuntarily flew toward Juan. In the end, Juan grabbed his collar with one hand and lifted him into the air. "Let go of our boss." The bodyguard shouted and quickly changed the magazine, intending to shoot at Juan again. Unfortunately, Juan didn't intend to continue the stalemate with these bodyguards. With a flick of his finger, the bodyguards were all involuntarily sent flying. They smashed the glass door behind them and fainted on the spot. "All of you stay here. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite." The upper echelons who were hiding originally planned to sneak away. Unfortunately, Juan's words made them all shrink back. They trembled as they looked at Juan. "Old man, you just said that it was the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Could it be related to the Kunlun Mountain?" Juan no longer paid attention to those upper echelons. Instead, he indifferently looked at the trembling old man in his hand and asked. The old man was already scared by Juan's methods. He immediately confessed the origin of the Kunlun Jade Pillar. It turned out that the Kunlun Jade Pillar was shot out from the Kunlun Mountain a year ago. It was said that there were a total of 15 Kunlun Jade Pillars from the Kunlun Mountain. Each pillar was different in size. However, its heaven-defying effect slowly spread among the upper echelons of China. Many upper echelons were full of desire for the Kunlun Jade Pillar. According to the rumors, the Kunlun Jade Pillar could cure all kinds of diseases. It even had the miraculous effect of bringing the dead back to life. Kunlun Mountain. Chapter 2655. Old Zhang Kunlun Mountain was known as the #1 sacred mountain in Huaxia. The mountain range started from the east of the Pamir Plateau in the west, traversed between Xinjiang and Tibet, and extended all the way to Qinghai. Juan didn't expect the Kunlun Jade Pillar to appear in Kunlun Mountain. Didn't that mean that the place of origin that they had been searching for was also in Kunlun Mountain? "Do you know anything about the other Kunlun Jade Pillars?" Juan asked the old man. He had a feeling that the Kunlun Jade Pillar was definitely a key item. He planned to collect it. The old man smiled bitterly and shook his head. "I'm not too sure about the Kunlun Jade Pillar, but old Qin from the Realm Knight Group has been collecting them. He should know more than me." "Then bring me there," Juan said calmly. "Immortal, are you going to go there just like that?" The old man looked at Juan's outfit and asked cautiously. In the presidential suite of a 5-star hotel in Jinling City, Juan stood in front of the full-length mirror and looked at the t-shirt and jeans he was wearing. His eyes were filled with nostalgia. Strictly speaking, Earth was Juan's true hometown. His feelings for Earth were much deeper than those for the heavenly armor planet. Now that he was wearing clothes from Earth again, Juan felt as if a lifetime had passed. "Brat, what are you doing? There's a connection between the Jade Pillars. We should be able to find it by following the connection. Are you really going to ask a mortal?" The green-haired mummy appeared in the room and looked at Juan's modern clothes in annoyance. Juan looked at the mummy indifferently and said, "When I found the Kunlun Jade Pillar, I used my divine sense to scan the entire Huaxia. I only found 13 Kunlun Jade Pillars in Huaxia. The old man said that there are 15 Kunlun Jade Pillars in total. Including the one I have, there's still one missing. The clue to that pillar is broken. Perhaps I can get some information from Old Qin." At this point, Juan glanced at the green-haired mummy and continued, "You and Bloodscale have been to Kunlun Mountain, right? Did you find anything?" The green-haired mummy said with a serious look, "We have found the hidden entrance of Mount Kunlun. However, we need 2 jade pillars. The jade pillars are the keys. One is useless." "Your guess is correct. The 15 Kunlun Jade Pillars should be another jade pillar that has been split into 15 parts. If we want to open the entrance to Kunlun Mountain, We need to gather all 15 Kunlun jade pillars. But how are you so sure that old Qin knows about the last Kunlun jade pillar? The green-haired mummy asked doubtfully. Zhuan smiled faintly and said, since old Qin is willing to rent the Kunlun jade pillar to others and isn't afraid of it being snatched away, he clearly has some confidence. And this confidence, in my opinion, means that this old man still has another Kunlun jade pillar. However, I didn't find a second Kunlun jade pillar in Jinling City. Clearly, this old man is very cunning. He must have hidden the last Kunlun jade pillar in a very secretive place. The green-haired mummy nodded. He felt that Zhuowen's speculation was reasonable. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, followed by a respectful voice. Mr. Zhuo, are you done changing? If you are, this little one will bring you to see old Qin. Zhuowen opened the door. Outside the door was the old man that Zhuowen had grabbed by the collar on the balcony earlier. This old man's name is Zhang Jin. He runs a textile business in Jinling City. His assets are over 100 million, and he can be considered as an upper-class person in Jinling City. However, this Zhang Jin loves to hug someone's thigh. Even if he became an upper-class person, this Zhang Jin was willing to run errands for old Qin in order to hug his thigh. Now that Zhang Jin had witnessed Zhuowen's unfathomable strength, he treated Zhuowen like he was his own father. His attitude was so good that there was nothing that could be said about it. This is your reward. Zhuowen took out a pill and gave it to the old man. The latter looked at the pill in his hands suspiciously. Although he was nervous, he still swallowed it under Zhuowen's watchful gaze. After swallowing the pill, the old man's complexion turned rosy. His entire body was filled with vigor, as though he was a few years younger. My lord, is this a miracle pill? Zhang Jin asked excitedly. Lead the way. If you perform well, you will not be short of this pill. Zhuowen's expression was calm. The pill that he gave Zhang Jin was the most common body-strengthening pill. It was used by cultivators who had just stepped onto the path of martial arts to strengthen their body. This pill was too common in Heavenly Armor Planet. However, on Earth, where there was no cultivation, it was an extremely precious miracle pill. Zhang Zhen agreed excitedly. In his heart, he was determined to hug Zhuowen's thigh tightly. After all, at his age, he already had enough wealth. What he lacked the most was health. The pill that Zhuowen casually gave out could actually revitalize his old body. This was much more precious than any gold or silver. After walking out of the five-star hotel, Zhang Jin quickly walked to the door of a Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan in front of the door and personally opened the door for Zhuowen. Under the envious gazes of many people at the door, Zhuowen calmly entered the car. Zhang Jin walked to the other side and sat beside Zhuowen in the back seat, carefully serving him. Zhuowen sat in the car, leaned against the car pillow, and closed his eyes to rest. Seeing that Zhuowen was unwilling to speak, Zhang Jin did not want to disturb Zhuowen. Instead, he asked the driver to hurry to the Realm Knight Group's headquarters. Half an hour later, the sedan stopped in the most prosperous area of Jinling City. It was brightly lit and bustling with people. In this area, the most dazzling building belonged to the Realm Knight Group's headquarters, the Realm Knight Building. This building was more than 600 meters tall. In this area, it stood out like a crane among chickens. It was extremely eye-catching. After getting out of the sedan, Zhang Jin enthusiastically led Zhuowen into the Realm Knight Building. The elevator in the Realm Knight Building was very fast. It only took a minute to reach the top floor. Elder Qin is in this room. Sir, let's go in. Zhang Jin pointed at the iron door at the end of the corridor and said to Zhuowen with a smile. However, the moment Zhang Jin took a step forward, he was immediately pulled back by Zhuowen. Then, the iron door immediately opened, and more than 30 fully armed soldiers walked out. These soldiers held explosion-proof shields that were as tall as a person. They walked side by side, and their cold muzzles were pointed at Zhuowen and Zhang Jin in the corridor. Behind these armed policemen stood a spirited old man. Although this old man had a head full of white hair, his eyes were sharp. It was obvious that this was a unique temperament formed by being in a high position for a long time. Next to the old man was a charming secretary in uniform. At this moment, the secretary was holding a folder in her hand and looking at the armed policeman in front of her with a pale face. She had just finished helping Elder Chen with the documents and was about to leave when she saw these armed policemen rushing out from another place. Then, the secretary saw that these 30 armed policemen were only targeting the old man and an ordinary young man in front of her. Elder Zhang. The secretary recognized the old man next to the young man. Then, she looked at Elder Chen and asked, "Elder Chen, what happened? Why are the armed policemen being deployed?" You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.